Hello there, my sleepy wasteland wanderers. Tonight, we journey through the desolate beauty of the Fallout universe, where the ruins of civilization hold stories waiting to be told. I'll be your guide through these radioactive landscapes, sharing tales of survival, hope, and the quiet moments that exist even in the harshest environments. So get comfortable, dim your lights, and let the sounds of the wasteland carry you away. The gentle glow of your Pip-Boy will guide our path as we explore these forgotten places together. Now close your eyes and let your mind drift as we step into the world of Fallout, where dreams await beyond the wasteland horizon. The wasteland stretched out in endless waves of amber and rust, a sea of earth touched by nuclear autumn. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cracked highway, its once smooth surface now a patchwork of fissures where determined weeds pushed through nature's slow reclamation of the world humans had briefly borrowed. Dust particles danced in slanting rays of golden light, creating ephemeral veils that shifted with each gentle breeze. A solitary figure moved along the broken road, their silhouette wavering slightly in the heat rising from sun-baked asphalt. Their leather armor bore the weathered patina of countless miles, reinforced in places with mismatched metal plates. A wide-brimmed hat provided shade against the relentless sun, while a scarf wound loosely around the lower face offered protection from the ever-present dust. This was the Wanderer, known by many names in many settlements, but choosing to carry none permanently. Some called them the Vault Dweller, noting the faded blue and yellow jumpsuit sometimes visible beneath the armor, the legacy of an underground beginning that had given way to a life of perpetual movement across the Commonwealth's scarred terrain. The Wanderer's pace was unhurried, yet purposeful, conserving energy while covering ground with the efficient rhythm of someone accustomed to long journeys. A weathered pack hung from broad shoulders, containing the careful selection of necessities that meant the difference between life and death in the wasteland. The distant call of a radiated crow echoed across the empty landscape, emphasizing the vast solitude. Around a gentle bend in the highway, the monotony of the wasteland gave way to something unexpected, a splash of green amid the predominant browns and greys that typically defined the Commonwealth. The Wanderer paused, adjusting worn binoculars to survey this anomaly from a safe distance. Through the lenses, details emerged from the haze. What had first appeared as simply an unusual patch of color revealed itself to be a small farm, perhaps a dozen plots of cultivated land, surrounding the shell of what had once been a modest pre-war estate. The main house remained partially intact, its roof repaired with corrugated metal and salvaged wood. A barn stood nearby, its red paint long faded to a dusty rose, but its structure sound. Most remarkable was the carefully maintained fence encircling the property. Not the haphazard barricades of typical wasteland defenses, but a thoughtfully constructed boundary of wooden posts and metal wire, designed to keep moderate threats at bay while creating a visual demarcation between the cultivated sanctuary within and the chaotic wilderness beyond. The Wanderer lowered the binoculars, a faint smile forming beneath the dust scarf. Functioning farms were rare treasures in the Commonwealth, representing not just food security, but something less tangible and more valuable: hope, stability, the persistent human drive to create rather than merely survive. After weeks of traversing abandoned towns and radiation-scorched wilderness, The sight of deliberately tended crops offered a welcome reminder of what could be rebuilt from the ashes of the old world. Decision made, the wanderer adjusted their pack and descended from the highway embankment, moving with increased caution. Experience had taught harsh lessons about approaching unknown settlements. Not all welcomed strangers, and even peaceful farmers might react with justified suspicion to an armed traveler appearing unannounced. As the distance closed, more details emerged. The crops were primarily tattos and muck fruit, hardy radiation-resistant produce that formed the agricultural backbone of most Commonwealth settlements. A small Brahmin pen stood at one corner of the property, housing 3 of the 2-headed cattle that provided milk, fertilizer, and occasionally meat for those fortunate enough to maintain a herd. Movement caught the wanderer's eye. A man in his 50s emerged from the barn carrying a bucket, his weathered face partially obscured by a grey beard streaked with white. He wore practical clothes, sturdy boots, patched overalls, and a faded flannel shirt with sleeves rolled to the elbows. Despite his focus on the task at hand, there was an alertness to his posture that spoke of someone well aware of the dangers that could appear at any moment. The wanderer approached the fence line and waited, making no attempt to cross the boundary without invitation. After a moment, the farmer noticed the figure standing at his perimeter and set down his bucket. With cautious efficiency, he reached for a weathered shotgun leaning against the barn wall, not pointing it at the visitor, but keeping it readily available as he approached. "That's far enough, friend," the farmer called, his voice carrying the slight rasp of someone who had breathed too much dust over too many years. "State your business." "Just passing through," the wanderer replied, keeping hands visible and posture relaxed. The farmer studied the visitor for a long moment, eyes narrowed against the late afternoon sun. Whatever he saw in the wanderer's demeanor must have offered some reassurance as his posture relaxed slightly, though the shotgun remained in hand. Passing through to where exactly? Not much beyond here except radiation and trouble. Wherever there's work to be done, the wanderer answered simply, or people who need help. A faint smile crinkled the corners of the farmer's eyes. "Well, that's a refreshing change from the usual. Most folks passing this way are either running from something or looking to take what isn't theirs." He gestured with his free hand toward the crops. "Name's Howard. My family and I have been working this land for going on 12 years now." "It's impressive," the wanderer said with genuine appreciation. "Not many can make things grow in Commonwealth soil these days. Takes patience and no small amount of stubbornness," Howard acknowledged. His eyes narrowed again, but this time in consideration rather than suspicion. "You said you're looking for work? We could use an extra hand as it happens. Nothing permanent, just a day's labor for a good meal and a safe place to rest." Before the wanderer could respond, a woman's voice called from the direction of the house. "Howard, who are you talking to out there?" Both turned to see a woman in her late 40s approaching, her dark hair pulled back in a practical braid. Like Howard, she carried the lean, muscled physique of someone whose survival depended on daily physical labor. "Travel from the road, Martha," Howard called back. "Says they're looking for work." Martha joined her husband at the fence, her assessment of the wanderer swift and thorough. "We could use the help, that's certain, especially with those radroaches getting into the southwest field again." She turned to the visitor. "Can you handle a weapon?" The wanderer nodded, gesturing to the weathered 10 PM pistol holstered at their hip and the machete strapped across their back. "I've cleared my share of pests. Radroaches are more than pests when they're getting into your food supply," Howard grumbled. "Nasty things have been coming from that collapsed cellar behind the old guest house. Tried blocking it up, but they keep finding ways through." A youth of perhaps 16 or 17 emerged from the house, curiosity overcoming caution as he approached the adults. "Are we hiring a mercenary?" he asked, excitement evident in his voice. "This isn't a mercenary, Michael," Martin corrected gently. "Just someone willing to trade honest work for a meal." She turned back to the wanderer. "My son's enthusiasm aside, we really could use help with those radroaches. They've been getting more persistent, and with harvest so close, we can't afford to lose any more crops." "I'd be glad to help," the wanderer replied. "Clear out the nest, secure the cellar entrance better." Relief visibly washed over Howard's features. "That would be a weight off our minds," he admitted, finally lowering the shotgun completely. "Come on in then. We'll get you settled and show you the problem area." The gate creaked slightly as Howard swung it open. As the wanderer stepped onto the property, the subtle shift in atmosphere was immediately noticeable. Within the boundaries of the farm, the air carried the rich scent of cultivated soil and growing things, a stark contrast to the metallic dust of the wasteland beyond. Michael approached with barely contained excitement, clearly viewing the arrival of a wasteland traveler as a welcome break in the routine of farm life. "Where are you from? Have you fought Deathclaws? Been to Diamond City?" "Michael," Martha admonished gently, "let our guest at least get settled before your interrogation." The wanderer offered a reassuring smile. "No trouble. Yes to Diamond City, though I don't stay long in settlements. And Deathclaws are best observed from very far away, when possible." Howard gestured toward a water pump standing near the barn. "You'll want to wash up before anything else. Then we'll show you where those radroaches have been coming from." The water that flowed from the pump carried the faint metallic taste common to all Commonwealth sources, but it was remarkably clear, evidence of a well-maintained purification system. The wanderer removed the dust scarf and hat, splashing cool water over a face weathered by sun and wind. Refreshed, the wanderer followed the family toward the southwest corner of the property, where rows of tatar plants stretched in careful alignment. At the field's edge stood the crumbling remains of what had once been a small guest house, its roof long collapsed. "The cellar entrance is behind there," Howard explained, pointing to a slanted wooden door set into the ground, partially hidden by overgrowth. "Used to be storage for the original property owners, but the far wall collapsed at some point, opening into an old storm drain. That's where the radroaches are coming from." Martha reached into her pocket and produced several shotgun shells, which she handed to the wanderer. "For your trouble, we'd go in ourselves, but Howard threw his back out last week trying to shift that fallen support beam," Michael provided helpfully, earning a resigned sigh from his father. "Thank you for your candor, son," Howard said dryly. "But yes, I'm not as spry as I once was, and Martha needs to tend to the Brahmin. Their calf has been showing signs of radiation sickness." The wanderer accepted the shells with a nod of thanks, though the 10M pistol would likely be sufficient for radroaches. "I'll take care of it. Best if you all keep clear until I signal it's safe." With practiced efficiency, the Wanderer checked weapons and adjusted armor. The cellar doors protested with a groan of rusted hinges as they were pulled open, revealing stone steps descending into shadow. The smell that wafted up was distinctive, the musty odor of long undisturbed pre-war debris, mingled with the unmistakable, chitinous scent of radroaches. The Wanderer produced a small flashlight from a belt pouch, one of the precious working pre-war devices that made nighttime navigation possible. Its beam cut through the darkness, revealing a cellar that had once been orderly but now lay in chaotic disarray. At the far end, just as Howard had described, a section of wall had given way, creating an opening into what appeared to be a pre-war drainage system. With cautious steps, the Wanderer descended into the cellar, ears attuned to the faint scuttling sounds that confirmed the presence of radroaches nearby. These mutated cockroaches were among the Commonwealth's most common hazards, not particularly dangerous individually, but their tendency to nest in large numbers could make them a genuine threat, especially when encountered in confined spaces. The flashlight beam caught movement. A lone radroach emerged from behind a fallen shelf, its armored carapace glistening unpleasantly in the artificial light. The Wanderer's reaction was immediate and practiced, the 10mm pistol lifting and firing in one fluid motion. The report echoed in the confined space as the bullet found its mark. That single shot, however, stirred the nest. From the opening in the far wall came the distinctive rushing sound of multiple radroaches responding to the disturbance. The Wanderer counted at least 8 of the oversized insects emerging from the darkness, their chitinous bodies each the size of a small dog. Rather than retreating up the stairs, the Wanderer adopted a stable firing stance, knowing that controlled elimination was preferable to allowing any roaches to escape toward the farm's crops. With methodical precision, each shot found its target, the 10mm rounds powerful enough to penetrate the creature's natural armor at this range. The cellar echoed with report after report until silence fell again. The Wanderer waited, listening intently for any indication of further movement from the drainage tunnel. After a full minute of stillness, it seemed the immediate threat had been eliminated, but experience suggested radroach nests were rarely so small. The tunnel itself would need to be investigated to ensure no larger colony remained to cause future problems. Reloading the pistol and securing the flashlight to a strap to free both hands, the Wanderer approached the collapsed section of wall. The opening was narrow but passable, leading into a concrete drainage tunnel that might once have helped manage rainwater for the pre-war property. Now it served as an ideal nesting ground for creatures that thrived in dark, undisturbed places. The air grew thicker as the Wanderer carefully navigated the tunnel, the flashlight beam revealing generations of radroach evidence, shed carapaces, egg casings, and the partially decomposed remains of whatever prey the colony had dragged back to consume. Around a gentle curve in the tunnel, the beam illuminated the main nest, a grotesque conglomeration of material ranging from shredded pre-war garbage to more recent debris, all bound together with the sticky secretions radroaches used to secure their breeding grounds. Within this macabre structure, dozens of egg clusters pulsed with incipient life, each one capable of producing 6 to 8 new radroaches if allowed to hatch. This discovery explained the increasing pressure on the farm. The colony was expanding, and the farm's cultivated crops represented an irresistible food source compared to the meager pickings available in the drainage system. Left unchecked, the colony would continue growing until it overwhelmed even the most vigilant defense efforts. From the pack came a small metal canister, one of the precious few incendiary grenades the Wanderer carried for situations where controlled fire was the most effective answer. After ensuring the tunnel had no obvious connection to the farm's structures above, the wanderer pulled the pin, placed the grenade deep within the nest structure, and retreated quickly around the bend. The dull whoomp of the incendiary igniting was followed by the crackling sound of intensely hot flames consuming the nest material. The wanderer waited until the initial flare had subsided before carefully checking the result. The nest was thoroughly destroyed, the flames already beginning to die down as they consumed the available fuel. No eggs had survived the intense heat, and any adult radroaches not encountered earlier would find nothing to return to. With the immediate threat eliminated, attention turned to preventing future infestations. The tunnel entrance in the cellar wall would need to be sealed more effectively than Howard's previous attempts. The wanderer returned to the cellar, finding only the still forms of those already dispatched. Climbing the stairs back into daylight, the wanderer found the family waiting at a safe distance, expressions hopeful but restrained. Life in the Commonwealth taught people to moderate their expectations. "How clear," the wanderer announced, holstering the pistol. "Found the main nest in a drainage tunnel beyond the cellar. It's been eliminated." Relief visibly washed over Howard's features. "That's the best news we've had in weeks. Those things have been getting into our tato crop for days now. Did you see many?" "About a dozen adults and a significant egg cluster," the wanderer explained. "They were establishing a major colony. The entrance will need to be properly sealed, not just blocked but filled in. Otherwise they'll just find another way through eventually." Martha nodded thoughtfully. "We've got some concrete mix salvaged from that hardware store Michael found last month. Been saving it for repairs to the well housing, but this takes priority." Michael's expression brightened with the prospect of construction work. "I can help mix it. We'll need aggregate though. The small stones from the creek bed would work." The conversation turned to practical matters of repairs as the family's tension visibly eased. The immediate threat was gone, and the longer-term solution was within their capabilities, a rare combination of good fortune in Commonwealth living. As the afternoon began its gentle transition toward evening, the family and their visitor worked together to address the cellar entrance. The wanderer's experience with Wasteland construction techniques complemented Howard's practical knowledge of his property's needs, while Michael's youthful energy and Martha's organizational skills made the work proceed efficiently. "Where did you learn to do this?" Michael asked, watching as the wanderer demonstrated the proper technique for smoothing the surface of the setting concrete. "Necessity," came the simple reply. "When you travel enough, you pick up skills from everyone you meet. Diamond City has some skilled masons who taught me the basics. Learned more helping repair settlement walls near Lexington." As they worked, Martha studied the wanderer with the perceptive gaze of someone accustomed to reading people accurately. "You're from a vault originally, aren't you?" she asked, nodding toward the blue and yellow fabric visible at the wanderer's collar. "Don't see many vault dwellers out here, especially not ones so comfortable with wasteland living." The wanderer nodded, taking a sip of water before responding. "Vault 81, spent my early years there, but the world outside called louder than the security inside." Howard gave a knowing grunt as he rested his back against the barn wall. "Security's worth something in the Commonwealth, but a cage is still a cage, no matter how comfortable." "Exactly," the wanderer agreed, surprised by the farmer's insight. "Better to face the radiation and take your chances than live an entirely prescribed life." As the afternoon deepened into early evening, the concrete was left to set under Michael's watchful eye, while Howard invited their visitor to see the rest of the farm. Pride was evident in his voice as he showed off the irrigation system he'd devised, channeling purified water from the well to each cultivation plot through a network of salvaged pipes and homemade filters. "The real trick is keeping the radiation levels low enough," he explained. demonstrating a handheld radiation meter he used to test soil samples. We add certain minerals to bind the radioactive particles, then filter them out with each irrigation cycle. Takes time, but each season the soil gets a little cleaner. The Wanderer examined the system with genuine appreciation. This is impressive engineering. You could teach the settlements a thing or two. Howard's weathered face creased with a modest smile. Just adapted techniques my grandfather used before the war. He was an agricultural scientist, left journals that survived in a locked cabinet. Martha's the one who really made it work, though. She understands chemistry better than I ever will. The tour continued to the Brahmin pen, where Martha was administering medicine to a calf whose second head drooped slightly, showing the early signs of radiation sickness common to Commonwealth livestock. Radaway for Brahmin, she explained, noticing the Wanderer's interest. Modified the human formula, less effective, but doesn't make them as sick afterward. This little one should be fine in a day or two. The adult Brahmin regarded the visitor with the placid curiosity characteristic of their mutated species, 4 eyes blinking lazily as they chewed their evening feed. Despite their unusual appearance, there was something deeply normal about their presence. The continuation of pastoral life that had defined human agriculture for millennia, adapted to this altered world, but fundamentally unchanged in purpose. As twilight approached, Martha announced that dinner would be ready soon. Nothing fancy, she cautioned, but fresh and filling. More than can be said for most meals in the Commonwealth. The farmhouse interior revealed the careful accumulation of both practical necessities and small comforts that defined successful Commonwealth living. Most telling were the small details that transformed mere shelter into a home. Faded photographs in repaired frames, hand-sewn cushions adding color to practical seating, a collection of relatively intact books arranged on shelves built into one wall. Martha moved efficiently between the wood stove and a makeshift kitchen area, the scents filling the room remarkable by Wasteland standards. The rich aroma of tato stew made with actual herbs grown in a small protected garden, cornbread made from ground razor grain, and the distinctive sweet smell of mutfruit preserves. We eat together every evening, Howard explained as he gestured for the Wanderer to take a seat. Martha insists on it, no matter how busy the day gets. Says it's how we remember we're still civilized. She's right, the Wanderer replied softly. It's the small ceremonies that keep us human. Dinner unfolded with the comfortable rhythm of family routine, temporarily expanded to include their visitor. As they ate, conversation flowed naturally, initial reserve giving way to the universal human desire for news and stories from beyond their immediate experience. The Wanderer shared carefully selected tales of recent travels, settlements expanding, trade routes being secured, small victories against the entropy that constantly threatened to overwhelm human efforts at rebuilding. Is it true Diamond City has electric lights all the time now? Michael asked, fascination evident in his expression. Jim Cassidy told us they've got the reactor working properly again. Parts of the city do, the Wanderer confirmed. The upper stands especially. They're expanding the grid slowly, prioritizing essential services. The marketplace stays lit through the night now. Howard nodded thoughtfully. Progress, real progress. Sometimes out here, it's hard to believe things might actually be improving anywhere. They are in pockets, the Wanderer assured him. Settlements connecting with each other, pooling resources and knowledge. It's slow, but there's momentum building. Martha's expression held cautious hope. Maybe Michael will see something closer to a proper world then. Better than our generation has known at least. The conversation continued through the meal and into the evening, the family clearly valuing this rare connection to the wider Commonwealth. They shared their own history in turn. How Howard and Martha had met as caravan guards, their decision to settle and build something that could last, the challenges and small triumphs of establishing the farm in hostile territory. The first 3 years were the hardest, Martha recalled, passing around modest portions of precious moot fruit preserve spread on cornbread for dessert. The soil was dead, practically poisonous. We lived on whatever Howard could hunt and trade for while we worked the land. Worth it, though, Howard added, his weathered hand briefly covering his wife's on the table. Seeing that first crop come in, knowing we'd grown it ourselves from this broken ground. Can't put a price on that feeling. As the evening deepened, lanterns were lit against the growing darkness, precious oil carefully measured for this daily necessity. The warm light created a golden cocoon within the farmhouse, holding the wasteland night at bay. We take watch shifts through the night, Howard explained. Raiders aren't common this far out, not enough to attract them, but caution keeps us alive. I'll take a shift, the Wanderer offered immediately. It's the least I can do for your hospitality. The evening settled into quieter activities as energy waned after the day's work. Martha mended clothing by lantern light, her nimble fingers working with practiced efficiency. Howard cleaned and oiled tools that had seen use during the day, preparing them for tomorrow's tasks. Michael pored over a tattered pre-war book about mechanical engineering, occasionally making notes in a handmade journal. The Wanderer sat by the window, watching the Commonwealth night deepen beyond the glass. Stars emerged in patches between drifting clouds, their light undiminished by the atomic reshaping of the world below. There was peace in this moment, not the empty quiet of abandoned places that form so much of wasteland travel, but the alive silence of a functioning household at rest, punctuated by small sounds of domestic activity. Deep night found the Wanderer on watch, seated on a handmade chair on the small covered porch that fronted the farmhouse. The rifle Howard had provided rested within easy reach, loaded but with safety engaged, prepared but not paranoid, the balanced approach that characterized this family's survival strategy. The Commonwealth night spread in all directions, the landscape transformed by darkness into a terrain of shadows and subtle movement. A 3/4 moon provided enough illumination to distinguish the boundaries of the farm's cleared areas, while the stars contributed their ancient light from above. From this vantage point, the achievements of Howard and Martha became even more impressive. They had carved stability from chaos, growth from decay, creating a functioning homestead in a world that constantly resisted such efforts. Their success represented not just personal survival, but something more significant, proof that rebuilding remained possible, that humanity could reclaim and nurture rather than merely scavenge and consume. Morning arrived with the distinctive quality of light that precedes dawn, a gradual illumination that revealed the world in gentle increments, colors returning to a landscape reduced to monochrome by night. The Wanderer woke to the sounds of the household already in motion, Martha working at the wood stove, Howard's voice from outside as he spoke quietly to the Brahman, Michael pumping water into containers for the day's needs. "What are your plans now?" Howard asked as they ate breakfast. "You're welcome to stay another day if you'd like. Always more work than hands around a farm." The invitation was genuine, the family's initial caution having given way to appreciation for the Wanderer's help and company. For a moment the thought was tempting, days of structured work under open skies, evenings of conversation and shared meals, the gentle rhythm of agricultural life that had defined humanity for millennia before the bombs fell. But the road called, as it always did. There were settlements that relied on news and supplies carried by trusted travelers, information that needed to flow between scattered outposts of civilization, people searching for lost family members who might be found, with the right questions in the right places. "I should move on," the wanderer replied with genuine regret, "but I'm grateful for the rest and company." Understanding showed in Howard's eyes, the recognition of one who had once felt the same pull of the horizon before finding his place to stand fast. "The Commonwealth needs both kinds," he said philosophically. "Those who build in one place and those who connect the places together. Neither works without the other." After breakfast, preparations for departure unfolded with the same practical efficiency that characterized all activities on the farm. Martha packed a small bundle of provisions, fresh cornbread, dried mutfruit, even a precious jar of preserves, waving away the wanderers' protests that they had already provided more than enough in exchange for help with the radroaches. "Food freely given feeds the soul as well as the body," she insisted. "Take it, and perhaps someday you'll share with another who needs it." Michael seemed most affected by the impending departure, having clearly enjoyed the brief connection to the wider world that the wanderer represented. He hovered nearby as the visitors' pack was assembled, occasionally offering information about routes or conditions he had heard about from passing traders. When all was ready, the family walked their visitor to the gate, the morning sun now fully risen and beginning its daily journey across the sky. The farm looked different in this light, the practicality of its layout more evident, the careful arrangement of crops and structures revealing the thought that had gone into making this plot of land not just survivable but genuinely productive. "Remember you have friends here," Howard said as he extended his hand in farewell. "The Commonwealth's a little less empty knowing there are good people working the land. And traveling the roads between," Martha added, her expression conveying appreciation that went beyond words. Michael's goodbye was brightest, colored by youth's certainty of future possibilities. "Next time you come, I'll have the windmill working," he promised, pointing to a half-assembled structure behind the barn. "Then we'll have electric lights too, just like Diamond City." With final handshakes and nods of mutual respect, the wanderer passed through the gate and back onto the dusty road that wound toward the horizon. After a few dozen yards, they turned for one last look at the farm. This small miracle of persistence and hope amid the wasteland's harsh realities. Howard and Martha stood with Michael between them, a family portrait framed by the fields they had reclaimed from desolation. The wanderer raised a hand in final farewell before continuing along the road, footsteps finding the rhythm of travel once more. The farm gradually receded into the distance, but its impression remained, not just as a safe harbor visited briefly, but as a reminder of what could be built when determination overcame despair. The Commonwealth stretched ahead, vast and dangerous, yet also filled with possibilities. The wanderer's steps carried a renewed sense of purpose, the night's rest and human connection providing strength for the journey ahead. In a pocket rested Martha's jar of preserves, a small weight representing something precious beyond its nutritional value, the gift of trust, the acknowledgement of shared humanity despite the harsh world that constantly tested it. Someday soon, as she had suggested, it would be shared with someone else in need, continuing the small acts of generosity that formed threads of connection across the broken landscape. As the farm finally disappeared from view behind a gentle rise in the terrain, the wanderer's thoughts turned toward the next destination. Somewhere ahead lay an abandoned library, where knowledge from the old world waited to be rediscovered. Fragile pages and forgotten holotapes containing wisdom that might serve the emerging communities of this new era. Stories told of a lone figure who had taken up residence there, protecting the remaining books from those who would burn them for warmth or destroy them out of ignorance. The afternoon sun cast golden light across the wanderer's path as thoughts drifted to what might be found within those weathered walls of learning. Perhaps forgotten technologies that could help places like Howard and Martha's farm. Maybe histories that would help the Commonwealth avoid repeating the mistakes that had led to nuclear devastation, or simply stories that would remind people of their shared humanity across the centuries. Reminders that even after apocalypse, the human spirit continued its ancient dance of falling and rising again. The library awaited, its crumbling dome just visible on tomorrow's horizon. But that's a story for another night, when sleep calls and dreams beckon. For now, the wanderer walks on, boots raising small clouds of dust from the broken highway. The gentle weight of Martha's preserves a reminder of good people and the possibility of finding home, however briefly, in the most unexpected corners of the wasteland. While the wanderer continued along the quiet highway, miles away, the grand marble facade of an old public library stood in dignified decay against the wasteland sky. Within its shadowed halls, dust motes danced in beams of light that filtered through collapsed sections of ceiling, illuminating rows of knowledge that had survived nuclear fire and 2 centuries of neglect. Among the shelves moved a solitary figure, carefully organizing salvaged books, while in the darkened corners, the soft shuffling of feral ghouls could be heard. Former patrons, forever trapped in the building they once visited for learning. As the wanderer bedded down for the night beneath the stars, unaware of what awaited in those literary catacombs, our next tale beckons from within the whispering pages of forgotten wisdom. Join us for Whispers in the Library. Dawn broke across the Commonwealth in gentle increments, painting the wasteland with subdued hues of amber and rose. The rising sun transformed the bleak landscape, its warming rays softening the harsh edges of ruined buildings and casting long, peaceful shadows across the broken terrain. The wanderer had risen before first light, gathering dew from mutated plants using a carefully arranged tarp system, one of many survival techniques learned during years of wasteland travel. After filtering this precious morning water and breaking camp, the wanderer continued along the cracked highway that had once connected bustling communities, now leading only between scattered outposts of civilization. The journey had a rhythm to it, careful steps avoiding stressed asphalt that might conceal sinkholes, occasional pauses to survey the horizon through weathered binoculars, moments of stillness, when instinct suggested caution. The Pip-Boy on the wanderer's wrist occasionally emitted soft clicks as its radiation detector registered the background levels that permeated everything in the Commonwealth. The device was a relic of Vault 81, a reminder of origins abandoned in favor of the uncertain freedom of the wasteland. Its screen glowed a gentle amber, displaying a map with a marker indicating the day's destination. A structure labeled simply as Public Library. By mid-morning, the building came into view on the horizon, a structure of unusual proportions in the wasteland landscape. Unlike the crumbling residential ruins or collapsed commercial structures that dotted the Commonwealth, the library retained much of its original grandeur. Its neoclassical facade rose from the surrounding desolation like a monument to a forgotten age, massive columns supporting an ornate pediment that had somehow withstood both nuclear devastation and 2 centuries of neglect. The wanderer approached with measured caution, surveying the grounds from a safe distance before proceeding closer. Rumors in the last settlement had spoken of this place, of knowledge preserved rather than destroyed, of a caretaker who protected the ancient texts from those who would burn them for momentary warmth. More practically, they'd mentioned the existence of intact technical manuals and pre-war educational holotapes that might contain information vital to rebuilding efforts. The grounds surrounding the library had once been a landscaped plaza, now transformed by time and radiation into a wild garden of mutated flora. Stunted trees with gnarled branches reached toward the sky, their leaves displaying the unusual patterns characteristic of radiation adaptation. Between them, hardy wasteland shrubs had colonized cracked pavement, their roots gradually breaking apart what human industry had created. Despite this encroachment of nature, a path had been maintained leading to the main entrance, not cleared completely, but subtly managed to allow passage while preserving the camouflage that might discourage less determined visitors. The wanderer noted this sign of human presence with interest. Someone was indeed caring for this place, maintaining it with deliberate subtlety. The library's massive bronze doors stood partially ajar, just enough to permit entry while minimizing exposure to the elements. Their surfaces were oxidized to a dull green, ornate engravings depicting scenes of learning and enlightenment now weathered but still discernible. Above them, carved into the stone lintel, partially obscured by climbing vines, were words still legible after centuries. Knowledge is liberty. Before entering, the wanderer checked equipment one final time, ensuring the 10mm pistol was loaded but secured, the small flashlight accessible, water and emergency supplies within easy reach. Wasteland exploration demanded preparation. Even places that seemed benign could conceal unexpected dangers. The machete strapped across the back might serve as well, especially if the rumors of feral ghouls in the building's lower levels proved accurate. With preparations complete, the wanderer slipped through the narrow opening between the doors, entering a space that felt fundamentally different from the harsh wasteland outside. The atmosphere within the library held a stillness rarely experienced in the Commonwealth. Not the empty silence of abandoned places, but the rich quiet of accumulated knowledge, as though the very air had absorbed something from the thousands of books housed within these walls. The entrance foyer opened into a vast central chamber, a rotunda that rose 3 stories to a domed ceiling. Soft light filtered through dirty skylights and broken sections above, creating shifting patterns on the marble floor below. Circular balconies marked each level, with ornate iron railings and spiral staircases connecting them. Radiating outward from this central space were corridors leading to various reading rooms and specialized collection. Most remarkable was the relative intactness of the interior. While evidence of damage was certainly present, collapsed shelving in some areas, water stains marking walls where rain had penetrated the damaged roof, scattered debris across once polished floors, the majority of the library remained structurally sound. More importantly, many of the books themselves appeared to have survived, still arranged on shelves in a system that had outlasted the civilization that created it. The wanderer moved with quiet reverence through this monument to preserved knowledge, footsteps echoing softly despite attempts at silence. Here was something precious beyond measure in the resource-scarce wasteland, not food or water or ammunition, but the collected wisdom and imagination of the world that had been lost. Each intact volume represented ideas that had survived the nuclear fire, stories and information passing through apocalypse to reach whatever civilization might rise from the ashes. A soft sound from an adjacent reading room drew the wanderer's attention, the gentle rustle of pages being turned, followed by the scratch of a pencil on paper. Someone else was present, engaged in the quiet activity of study that had once been this building's purpose. Moving with increased caution, the wanderer approached the doorway, peering around its edge to observe without immediately revealing their presence. Within the reading room, seated at a table arranged beneath a gap in the ceiling that allowed natural light to illuminate the space, was a figure that defied immediate categorization. At first glance, they appeared to be a ghoul. That radiation transformed variant of humanity whose flesh had deteriorated while their lifespans extended indefinitely, but where most ghouls encountered in the wasteland were feral, reduced to mindless aggression by centuries of radiation poisoning. This individual was clearly engaged in deliberate, intellectual activity. They wore the remnants of what might once have been a librarian's professional attire, now patched and modified for wasteland practicality. Round spectacles perched incongruously on what remained of their nose, and their posture as they bent over an open book suggested the concentration of someone lost in study. A small lantern stood ready nearby, presumably for when natural light faded with evening. As the wanderer observed, the ghoul librarian looked up suddenly, alerted perhaps by some subtle sound betraying the visitor's presence. Their clouded eyes, characteristic of their kind, widened with surprise, but not hostility. "Well," they said, their voice carrying the raspy quality common to ghouls, but articulated with precise diction. "It's been quite some time since anyone bothered to knock. Most visitors these days either rush in looking for shelter or valuables, or they avoid the building entirely due to superstitious nonsense about haunted knowledge." The wanderer stepped into view, hands held slightly away from weapons to indicate peaceful intentions. "I didn't want to disturb your reading." A sound emerged from the ghoul that might have been a chuckle. "Considerate. Rare quality these days." They carefully marked their place in the book before closing it. "I'm Desmond, once head librarian of this institution, now its self-appointed caretaker. And you are?" "Just a traveler," the wanderer replied. "I heard rumors about this place in the last settlement, about knowledge preserved and someone protecting it." "Ah." Desmond adjusted his spectacles in a gesture that seemed to have survived from his pre-ghoul life. "My reputation precedes me, such as it is, yes. I've dedicated what remains of my unnaturally long life to preserving this collection. 216 years so far, though I lost track for a few decades in the middle there. Radiation madness, you understand. Fortunately, it passed." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Please sit. Visitors who come seeking knowledge rather than merely shelter or salvage are welcome companions. They help me remember why I continue this work when so few seem to value it." The wanderer accepted the invitation, setting down their pack while maintaining awareness of surroundings, a habit ingrained through years of wasteland survival. "You've maintained this place alone all this time?" "Not entirely alone," Desmond replied, his tone suggesting complexity in the answer. "There have been others who recognized the value of what remains here. Some stayed for years, helping catalog and preserve. Others simply passed through, borrowing knowledge to take back to their communities." "And then there are those below." "Below?" the wanderer asked, though with some idea of what he meant based on settlement rumors. Desmond nodded gravely. "The lower levels, archives, storage, administrative offices. When the bombs fell, many staff and visitors took shelter there. The radiation changed them, as it changed me. But where I was fortunate enough to retain my faculties, they succumbed to the feral state. They remain there still, wandering the stacks they once tended or visited." "Are they dangerous?" the wanderer asked, instinctively checking the pistol at their hip. "Only if disturbed," Desmond said. "They've established patterns, territories of a sort. I've learned to navigate around them when I need access to the lower collections. They seem to recognize me at some primitive level. Perhaps the smell of another ghoul provides some familiarity." He adjusted his spectacles again. "But they would perceive you differently. A stranger, an intruder, human." The Wanderer considered this information, integrating it with the mission that had brought them to the library. I'm looking for technical information, specifically agricultural purification methods. Anything about removing radiation from soil or water on a larger scale than personal filters. There's a settlement establishing farms that could benefit from such knowledge. Desmond's expression brightened noticeably, his clouded eyes seeming to gain focus. Agricultural restoration. Yes, we have several collections that might be relevant. Agricultural science journals, water management texts, even some government research on post-nuclear recovery that was being studied when the bombs fell. He rose from his chair with surprising grace for one so ancient. The most relevant materials would be in the environmental sciences section on the second floor, though some technical manuals might be in the basement archives. The mention of the basement caused both to pause briefly, acknowledging the complication presented by its feral inhabitants. Let's start with the second floor, the Wanderer suggested diplomatically. Perhaps we'll find what we need there. Desmond nodded appreciatively. A sensible approach. Follow me, but please, step carefully. Some of the flooring has weakened over the centuries, and we've arranged certain pathways to discourage less dedicated seekers. He led the way out of the reading room and back to the central rotunda, where one of the spiral staircases provided access to the upper levels. As they ascended, Desmond occasionally pointed out features of interest, particularly well-preserved collections, architectural details that had survived, innovative storage methods he had developed to protect fragile materials from the Commonwealth's harsh environment. The second floor opened into a series of specialized reading rooms, each dedicated to different fields of study. The environmental sciences section occupied a corner space with windows facing east and south, presumably designed to provide natural light for extended study sessions in the world before nuclear devastation. Now those windows were partially covered with carefully arranged translucent materials, pages from damaged plastic covers and similar items, that diffused the light to reduce UV damage to the books while still providing illumination. "Here we are," Desmond announced, gesturing to shelves that retained their organizational system despite the centuries. Soil science, water management, environmental remediation, all preserved as best I could manage. Some volumes show water damage from before I could repair the roof sections. Others suffered binding deterioration before I developed preservation techniques, but the information remains accessible. The Wanderer approached the shelves with something approaching reverence. Here was knowledge that had been commonplace in the world before, now transformed into precious treasure by nuclear fire and the passage of time. Carefully selected volumes might make the difference between successful cultivation and failed crops for Howard and Martha's farm, between sustainable settlement expansion and the constant struggle merely to maintain what had already been established. Under Desmond's guidance, they began to identify and examine the most promising texts. The Ghoul librarian's encyclopedic memory proved invaluable. Not only did he know which books contained relevant information, but he could often recall specific chapters or sections that addressed particular concerns. Hours passed in this methodical research, the afternoon light slowly shifting through the modified windows as they worked. "This one," the Wanderer said eventually, holding up a partially damaged but still legible manual titled Advanced Techniques in Radioactive Soil Remediation. "The mineral binding method described here sounds similar to what Howard has been attempting, but with more precise formulation." Desmond nodded approvingly. "An excellent find. The accompanying charts in Chapter 4 should help calibrate application rates based on contamination levels." He reached for another volume on an adjacent shelf. This one contains complementary information on irrigation systems designed to gradually flush bound contaminants. Together, they provide a comprehensive approach. Their collaborative research continued, yielding several promising sources of information. The Wanderer took careful notes in a small journal, occasionally sketching diagrams or copying tables of measurements that would be useful for practical application. Desmond provided context for some of the pre-war terminology, translating scientific jargon into concepts more readily applicable to the Commonwealth's current technological capabilities. As the natural light began to fade, Desmond lit his lantern, the warm glow creating a cozy atmosphere within the otherwise imposing library space. "We should consider concluding for the day," he suggested. "Navigation becomes more challenging after dark, and the lower levels grow more active with the night." At the mention of the lower levels, a distant sound reached them, the shuffling movement of multiple entities below, becoming more pronounced as daylight diminished. The ferals were indeed becoming more active, their mutated forms responding to some internal rhythm tied to the day/night cycle. "I'd hoped to find information on water purification at larger scales," the Wanderer said, conscious of the underlying tension created by the sounds from below, "specifically for agricultural use, rather than just drinking water." Desmond's expression grew thoughtful. "The most comprehensive materials on that subject would be in the government documents section in the basement archives. Technical manuals from the Water Treatment Authority, research from university partnerships with municipal systems." He paused, considering. "It would be valuable information, particularly for established settlements looking to expand agricultural production." The implication hung in the air between them. The most useful information was located precisely where the greatest danger lurked. The Wanderer weighed the potential benefits against the risks, a calculation familiar to anyone who had survived long in the wasteland. "If we moved quietly and efficiently," the Wanderer suggested, "how likely is it we could access those documents and return without disturbing the ferals?" Desmond adjusted his spectacles, a gesture that seemed to help him think. "There are pathways I've used successfully, times when certain areas tend to be clear based on the feral's habitual movements. With proper preparation and caution, it could be done with acceptable risk." He looked directly at the Wanderer, his clouded eyes nonetheless conveying intensity. "But you should understand, these aren't merely random ferals that wandered in. These were my colleagues, my patrons, in some cases my friends. I've never had the heart to permanently clear the building, despite the practical advantages that might offer." The Wanderer nodded, understanding. "I respect that, and I have no desire to harm them if it can be avoided. If you know safe routes and timing, I'd rather follow your expertise." Relief visibly crossed Desmond's weathered features. "Thank you. Too many visitors view ferals as merely obstacles to be eliminated." He carefully marked their place in the research materials and secured the most fragile volumes. "We should prepare properly. I have a small living space established in what was once the rare books room. We can rest there, collect what we need, and make our expedition to the archives in the early morning hours when the ferals are least active." They gathered their notes and selected reference materials, then followed a circuitous route through the second floor that eventually brought them to a secure door marked Special Collections. Inside, Desmond had created a surprisingly comfortable living space that reflected over 2 centuries of careful accumulation. Bookshelves created walls dividing the large room into functional areas. A sleeping space with a bed fashioned from salvaged materials. A cooking area centered around a small contained fire pit with proper ventilation. Storage sections organized with librarian precision. And a central living area with comfortable chairs arranged around a low table. "Home," Desmond said simply, gesturing to the space, "for longer than most structures in the Commonwealth have stood. Please make yourself comfortable while I prepare something to eat." The meal that followed was modest by pre-war standards, but remarkably refined for wasteland fare. cultivated mushrooms that Desmond grew in a dedicated dark space, preserved vegetables from trading with occasional passing caravans, and protein from carefully managed radroach farming that the librarian had established in an isolated section of the building's sub-basement. "I've found ways to adapt," he explained as they ate. "The library actually provides several advantages for sustainable living. The stone construction maintains relatively stable temperatures. The roof catchment system I've established provides clean water, and the isolated location discourages the more aggressive elements that plague the Commonwealth." As evening deepened into night, they planned their expedition to the archives, with Desmond sketching a map of the basement level and marking both the location of the documents they sought and the areas most frequently occupied by ferals. He indicated narrow maintenance corridors, partially collapsed sections that could be navigated but would be avoided by the larger feral ghouls, and timing for their movements based on patterns he had observed over decades. "We'll leave just before dawn," he decided. "They're most dormant then, clustering in the former staff break room and catalogue department rather than wandering the stacks. If we move quietly and maintain awareness, we should be able to reach the government documents archive, locate what we need, and return without incident." With the plan established, they settled in for the night, the Wanderer taking a comfortable chair while Desmond retired to his bed. The sounds from below remained audible but distant, a reminder of the building's other occupants going about their mindless routines in the darkness. Despite this underlying tension, there was something profoundly peaceful about the library at night, a sanctuary of knowledge existing outside the harsh realities of the wasteland, maintained through one individual's dedicated persistence across centuries. Morning arrived with subtle shifts in the quality of light filtering through carefully arranged coverings over the windows. Desmond was already awake and preparing for their expedition, laying out items they might need, extra light sources, a medical kit, gloves for handling potentially fragile documents. He also provided a small jar of what appeared to be translucent gel. "A masking agent," he explained, "derived from certain fungi I cultivate. It helps obscure the human scent that might trigger feral aggression. Not foolproof, but it provides an additional margin of safety." The Wanderer applied the gel to exposed skin as directed, noting its faint, earthy odor that seemed to fade almost immediately after application. They checked equipment one final time, ensuring everything was secure and wouldn't create unexpected noise. The 10mm pistol remained holstered but accessible, a last resort rather than primary option. Desmond led the way through the library's main floor, moving with the confident familiarity of someone navigating spaces they had known for centuries. They approached a staff door partially concealed behind what had once been the main circulation desk, its surface now covered with carefully arranged research materials and preservation supplies. "The main stairwell would be more direct," Desmond whispered as he produced an ancient keyring from his pocket, "but it opens directly into what was once the public computer area. That space tends to hold the largest concentration of ferals. This service stair will bring us down near technical services, which usually remains clear this time of day." The door opened with surprising smoothness, its hinges clearly maintained despite their age. Beyond lay a narrow stairwell, emergency lights long dead, now illuminated only by Desmond's lantern turned to its lowest setting. They descended in silence, each step carefully placed to avoid creating echoes in the enclosed space. At the bottom, another door opened onto the library's basement level, a stark contrast to the grand architecture above. Here was the utilitarian space that had supported the public-facing operations, labyrinthine stacks of compact shelving, processing rooms where new acquisitions had been catalogued, workstations for repairs and binding, administrative offices, and storage for less frequently requested materials. The air was noticeably different, cooler, with a distinctive stillness that seemed to absorb sound. Despite the advanced filtration system of the Pip-Boy, the Wanderer detected the faint organic odor characteristic of locations inhabited by feral ghouls, not overpowering, but present as a constant underlying note. Desmond paused, listening intently before proceeding. Hearing nothing concerning, he gestured for the Wanderer to follow, moving into the basement proper with careful, measured steps. They navigated between tall ranges of compact shelving, their path occasionally requiring detours around collapsed sections or areas where leaked water had damaged the flooring. From somewhere deeper in the basement came sounds familiar to anyone who had encountered ferals. The soft, irregular shuffling of deteriorated feet. Occasional groans that retained nothing of human speech but conveyed a disturbing echo of suffering. Desmond raised a hand for stillness when these sounds grew momentarily louder, both of them freezing in place until the noises receded again. Their route took them through what had once been the cataloging department, now a maze of overturned workstations and scattered documentation. Desmond pointed silently to a path through this chaos that would minimize noise, carefully established through his years of navigating these spaces. As they crossed this area, the Wanderer noticed personal items still at workstations. Coffee mugs with faded logos, framed photographs of families whose descendants might still live somewhere in the Commonwealth, jackets hung on the backs of chairs by people who had expected to return the next day. Beyond the cataloging department, they entered another section of compact shelving, these units bearing government markings and organized with the precise efficiency of official record-keeping. Desmond gestured toward a particular range, then held up 5 fingers to indicate the section number they saw. The government documents section was remarkably well preserved, perhaps because its utilitarian storage had prioritized function over form. Metal shelving had withstood the centuries better than the wooden furnishings in the public areas above, and the documents themselves, many stored in protective binders or archival boxes, had survived with minimal deterioration. Desmond moved directly to a specific section, his librarian's memory apparently undiminished by centuries or radiation exposure. He carefully extracted several technical manuals with municipal water systems printed on their spines, then indicated another shelf containing environmental impact studies conducted shortly before the war. They worked quickly but methodically, examining documents to identify those most relevant to current Commonwealth needs. The Wanderer focused on practical implementation guides rather than theoretical research, selecting materials that contained specific instructions, diagrams, and measurements that could be applied with available resources. Their concentration was suddenly broken by a sound much closer than the previous feral movements. The distinctive scrape of deteriorated shoes on linoleum flooring, accompanied by the labored breathing characteristic of ghoul physiology. Someone, or something, was approaching their position through the adjacent aisle of shelving. Desmond and the Wanderer froze, exchanging a glance that communicated the need for absolute stillness. The shuffling grew closer, now accompanied by minor impacts as the unseen feral occasionally bumped against shelving units. Through gaps in the documents, glimpses became visible. The tattered remains of business attire, skin withered and discolored by radiation exposure, movements jerky and without purpose beyond basic locomotion. The feral paused almost directly opposite their position, separated only by the shelving unit between them. Its breathing pattern changed, head tilting slightly as though sensing something unusual in its environment. For a tense moment, discovery seemed imminent, the creature's deteriorated senses attempting to process the presence of others in its territory. Desmond slowly raised one hand, drawing the Wanderer's attention to a small object he had palmed from his pocket, what appeared to be a mechanical library date stamp. a relic from the building's operational days. With deliberate care, he waited for the feral's attention to drift, then tossed the stamp down the aisle in the direction they had already searched. The metallic clatter of the stamp hitting shelving and then floor created the desired effect. The feral immediately lurched toward the sound, basic instincts drawing it away from their position. They remained motionless until the shuffling sounds had receded into the distance, then exchanged relieved glances. "We should conclude our search promptly," Desmond whispered, his voice barely audible. "That one will eventually return to its regular pattern, but the noise may draw others investigating." They worked with increased urgency, quickly finalizing selections based on relevance and practical applicability. The Wanderer carefully placed the chosen documents into a protective cloth bag Desmond had brought specifically for this purpose, ensuring nothing would be damaged during transport back to the upper levels. With their objective achieved, they began the return journey, retracing their path through the cataloging department and toward the service stairs. The basement remained eerily quiet except for occasional distant sounds of feral movement, but the tension of potential discovery accompanied every step. Both moved with the careful precision of those navigating dangerous territory, each footfall placed to minimize noise, each turn preceded by careful observation. They had nearly reached the service stairwell when a sudden crash echoed through the basement. Something had fallen or been knocked over in an area they couldn't see. The sound was followed by increased activity from multiple directions as ferals responded to the disturbance. Shuffling movements grew more pronounced, accompanied by the distinctive guttural vocalization that preceded feral investigation. "Quickly, but don't run," Desmond instructed, abandoning his previous whisper as stealth became secondary to efficient exit. Sudden movements trigger their pursuit instinct. They increased their pace, navigating the final section of basement with controlled urgency. The service door came into view just as the first feral appeared at the far end of the corridor behind them. A withered figure in the deteriorated uniform of library security, its movements becoming more agitated as it registered their presence. Desmond reached the door first, key already in hand, and opened it with remarkable steadiness given the circumstances. They passed through, closed it behind them, and Desmond turned the key in the lock. Not that it would hold indefinitely against determined ferals, but it would slow pursuit and potentially redirect their attention once immediate stimuli were removed. They ascended the service stairs without the previous concern for silence, focusing instead on putting distance between themselves and the agitated basement denizens. Upon reaching the main floor, Desmond secured this door as well, then led the way back toward his living quarters at a pace just short of running. Only when they had reached the safety of the rare books room, with its reinforced door designed to protect valuable collections in the world before, did they finally allow themselves to relax. The Wanderer placed the bag of documents carefully on Desmond's table, while the librarian checked to ensure they hadn't been followed. "Well," Desmond said finally, removing his spectacles to clean them with a soft cloth, a gesture that seemed comfortingly normal after their tense expedition. "That was more excitement than I typically prefer in my archival retrievals, but we succeeded." He nodded toward the bag. "Those documents represent some of the most comprehensive practical information on water purification systems, adaptable to current technological capabilities. Your farming settlement should find them invaluable." The Wanderer opened the bag, carefully arranging the selected materials on the table. "I can't take these permanently," they said, looking up at Desmond. "They belong here, as part of the knowledge you've preserved. But with your permission, I'd like to spend today making detailed notes and copies of the most critical information." Desmond's weathered features formed what might have been his version of a smile. "A refreshing attitude. Most visitors would simply take what they wanted without concern for future seekers who might need the same information. He gestured toward the table. Please, make whatever copies you need. I can provide additional paper and drawing supplies for diagrams. The knowledge only fulfills its purpose when it reaches those who can apply it. They spent the remainder of the day in this productive work, the Wanderer carefully transcribing essential information while Desmond provided context and occasionally suggested additional references from his extensive memory of the collection. By late afternoon, several detailed notebooks had been filled with specifications, formulas, diagrams, and practical implementation notes, tailored to Commonwealth conditions. As evening approached once more, the Wanderer carefully packed these notebooks into their travel bag, ensuring they were protected from potential weather during the journey back to Howard and Martha's farm. The original documents were returned to Desmond, who would restore them to their proper places in the archive when the basement level had settled back into its normal patterns. I should depart while daylight remains, the Wanderer said, securing the pack's straps. There's a sheltered location about 2 hours from here where I've camped before. I can reach it before full dark. Desmond nodded understanding. The wasteland demands respect for its rhythms. He reached into a nearby cabinet and withdrew a small package wrapped in preserved cloth. Take this, preserved rations for your journey, and this. He added a slender volume titled Practical Botany for Challenging Environments. Not strictly necessary for your current project, but it contains information on radiation-resistant crop varieties that your farming friends might find useful for diversification. The Wanderer accepted both gifts with genuine appreciation. Thank you, not just for these, but for maintaining this place, for ensuring that knowledge wasn't lost with the old world. It gives purpose to an extended existence I never sought, Desmond replied, his tone suggesting both resignation and satisfaction. Perhaps someday the Commonwealth will rebuild enough that libraries become common again, knowledge shared freely rather than hoarded or forgotten. Until then, he gestured to the surrounding shelves. I remain at my post. They walked together through the library's grand main floor, now bathed in the golden light of late afternoon sun streaming through damaged skylights. The space had a peaceful quality that contrasted sharply with the tension of their basement expedition, a reminder that beauty and knowledge had survived alongside the harshness of the post-nuclear world. At the massive bronze doors, they paused for farewells. "You're welcome to return," Desmond said. "Few visitors appreciate what this place truly offers. Most see only old paper and inexplicable dedication to preserving what they consider irrelevant. It's refreshing to assist someone who recognizes the practical value of remembered knowledge. I'll return when I can," the Wanderer promised, "and I'll spread word among trustworthy settlements about what you maintain here. Not specific enough to draw those who would abuse it, but enough that others seeking knowledge might find their way to your doors." With final handshakes and nods of mutual respect, the Wanderer slipped through the narrow opening between the bronze doors, emerging once more into the Commonwealth wasteland. The contrast was immediate, from the hushed atmosphere of accumulated knowledge to the harsh reality of survival in a broken world. Yet something had changed, a connection established between these separate realities. The knowledge preserved within those walls would now extend outward, helping those struggling to rebuild rather than merely survive. The Wanderer adjusted the pack straps and set off along the path leading away from the library, boot steps raising small puffs of dust from the cracked pavement. The afternoon sun cast a long shadow ahead, pointing the way toward the next destination and the people who waited for the precious information, now secured in the weathered travel pack. Behind, the library stood as it had for centuries, its classical facade glowing warmly in the late sunlight. Through one of the upper windows, Desmond could be seen returning to his endless work of preservation and organization, a solitary figure maintaining humanity's accumulated wisdom through the long darkness of nuclear aftermath. Within those walls, countless stories and ideas remained safe from the ravages of time and devastation, waiting patiently for a world that might once again value them for more than the momentary warmth their burning pages could provide. As the distance between the Wanderer and the library grew, thoughts turned to Howard and Martha's farm, to the practical applications of the knowledge now carried in carefully written notes, to the improvements that might be possible in soil remediation and water purification, to the potential for expanding arable land beyond current boundaries. Small steps toward rebuilding, toward reclaiming what had been lost, toward creating something sustainable from the ashes of the old world. While our traveller continued the journey with dwindling water supplies, elsewhere in the Commonwealth a different kind of sanctuary had formed. Along a cracked highway stretched a former rest stop, now transformed by industrious survivors into a community centered around a rare, clean water source. Solar panels powered purifiers that drew from deep underground, creating a small oasis of life amid the wasteland's dust. As travelers gather to trade stories and resources around this precious water source, our next tale awaits at the unexpected green haven beside the broken highway. Join us for Oasis by the Highway. The Commonwealth afternoon stretched endlessly across the horizon, the sun hanging in a sky of faded blue, casting its golden light over a landscape transformed by nuclear devastation and the slow reclamation of nature. Heat rose in visible waves from the cracked asphalt of the ancient highway, creating shimmering mirages that danced before disappearing as one approached. Dust devils swirled occasionally across the broken pavement, brief spirals of motion in an otherwise still world. The Wanderer moved with the measured pace of someone conserving energy while covering distance, boots finding the most stable path along the deteriorating roadway. The journey from the library had taken longer than expected, detours necessitated by a radiation storm that had swept unexpectedly across the eastern route had added nearly a day to the travel time. But the knowledge gained had been worth the effort. Notebooks filled with precious information about water purification systems and soil remediation techniques, now securely stored in the weathered pack. The Pip-Boy on the Wanderer's wrist occasionally clicked as it registered fluctuating radiation levels, its screen displaying a map with the current route highlighted. According to its data, the road ahead should eventually connect with a major highway that would lead back toward the region where Howard and Martha's farm lay. Another 2 days of travel, perhaps 3 if conditions deteriorated. Water supplies were running lower than ideal, the Wanderer noted after checking canteens during a brief rest period. The detour had consumed reserves meant for a more direct journey. While not yet dangerous, the situation warranted attention. Finding a safe water source would become a priority within the next several hours. As the afternoon progressed toward evening, the highway began a gentle ascent, climbing a long slope that promised a view of the terrain ahead from its crest. The Wanderer maintained the same measured pace despite the incline, breathing deepening but rhythm unchanged. Years of wasteland travel had created stamina specifically adapted to the Commonwealth's challenging landscape. Reaching the hill's summit as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, the Wanderer paused to survey what lay ahead. The highway continued its winding path through the wasteland, but approximately 2 miles distant, something unusual broke the monotony of dust and scattered ruins. A splash of green that stood out dramatically against the predominant browns and greys of the Commonwealth landscape. Binoculars revealed more detail. What appeared to be a highway rest stop or service station area, partially overgrown with unusually verdant vegetation. Even at this distance, the concentration of healthy plant life suggested the presence of clean water, a rarity in the irradiated wasteland. More surprising were the small figures moving around the location. People, perhaps a half dozen, engaged in what appeared to be the ordinary activities of a settlement. The wanderer lowered the binoculars, considering options. An established outpost might offer safe water and perhaps a secure location to rest for the night, but experience had taught caution. Not all gatherings in the wasteland welcomed strangers, and some actively sought to lure travelers with the promise of sanctuary, only to ambush them for supplies. Decision made to approach with appropriate caution, the wanderer continued along the highway, maintaining a pace that would reach the unusual oasis shortly before dusk, arriving with enough daylight to evaluate the situation while retaining the option to seek alternative shelter if the settlement proved unwelcoming or dangerous. As the distance closed, more details emerged. What had once been a standard highway rest area, the kind that had serviced travelers in the world before the bombs, had been transformed into a small but functional outpost. The main building remained partially intact, its roof repaired with salvaged materials, windows covered with makeshift shutters that could clearly be barricaded if necessary. Around this structure, ingenious use had been made of the original concrete dividers and planting areas. Garden plots had been established in what had once been decorative landscaping, now growing mute fruit, tattos, and other hardy wasteland crops. A Brahmin pen had been constructed using the concrete barriers formerly used to direct traffic, now serving to contain two of the two-headed cattle whose milk and fertilizing capabilities made them valuable assets to any settlement. Most remarkable was what appeared to be the source of the unusual vegetation, a water purification system constructed around what must have been the rest area's original groundwater access. Solar panels salvaged from highway signs had been repurposed to power pumps and filtration units, creating a small but functional water processing station. Excess water was being directed to a modest pond where healthier aquatic plants grew, their green leaves reflecting the late afternoon sunlight. Several canvas tents and small shelters had been erected around the main building, suggesting this place served as both permanent residence for some and temporary way station for others. People moved between these structures with the relaxed familiarity of routine, not the hypervigilance typical of those under constant threat, but the measured awareness of those who had established reasonable security in the wasteland. The wanderer approached openly, hands visible and pace unhurried, following the access road that connected the highway to the rest area. Experience had taught that surprising settlements, even with peaceful intentions, rarely ended well for anyone involved. Better to be seen approaching, intentions clear, giving residents time to make their own assessment. A figure detached from those working near the water purifier, moving to intercept the approaching visitor. The man was perhaps in his mid-50s, with the lean, weathered physique common to wasteland survivors. He carried a hunting rifle, not pointed at the wanderer but held ready, the reasonable caution of someone responsible for others' safety. His expression was neither hostile nor welcoming, merely evaluative. "That's far enough for now, traveler," he called when the wanderer was still a comfortable distance away. "State your business." The wanderer stopped, as requested, keeping hands visible. "Just passing through on the highway, saw your settlement. I'm looking for clean water to refill supplies. Willing to trade or work for it." The man studied the visitor for a long moment, his gaze taking in details that would inform his judgment. The condition of the wanderer's equipment suggesting capability rather than desperation, the pit-boy indicating vault origins. the overall presentation of someone who had survived the wasteland through competence rather than predation. "Water we've got," he acknowledged finally, his posture relaxing slightly though the rifle remained ready. "Always need good hands for work, too. I'm Marcus, sort of the unofficial mayor of this little oasis, though we don't stand much on titles or ceremony here. Call me the Wanderer," came the simple reply. "Most do." Marcus nodded, accepting the trail name without comment. Many who traveled the wasteland preferred the anonymity of such designations, their reasons their own. "Come on in then. We've got rules, simple ones. No fighting. Everyone contributes, and what water you take beyond immediate drinking needs gets balanced with work or trade. Fair enough?" "More than fair," the Wanderer agreed. With a gesture indicating the visitor should follow, Marcus led the way into the settlement proper. As they walked, he provided context for the unusual outpost. Used to be just a standard rest stop before the war. Started camping here maybe 7 years back when I discovered the groundwater was unusually clean. Some quirk of the local geology filtered out most radiation. Rigged up that first purifier from salvaged parts. He nodded toward the now displayed water system. Word got around, other travelers started stopping, some stayed. Now we've got something between a settlement and a caravan stop. The arrangement made practical sense. Clean water was among the Commonwealth's most precious resources, and establishing reliable access created a natural gathering point. What had begun as one man's fortunate discovery had evolved into a collaborative effort to maintain and improve the site, creating value that benefited both residents and travelers. As they approached the central area, other residents took notice of the newcomer, their reactions ranging from casual acknowledgement to more careful observation. A woman tending the garden plots straightened to watch their approach, her hand moving subtly closer to a tool that could serve as weapon if needed. An older man, sitting on a bench outside the main building, merely nodded, seemingly less concerned with new arrivals. "Evening meal's about an hour away," Marcus informed the Wanderer as they reached the central clearing. "Community affair, everyone contributes something. Travelers usually share news or take a shift on watch in exchange for a portion. Water barrels are over there for immediate needs." He indicated several large containers positioned near the purification system. "Carla's in charge of the purifier rotation if you're looking to refill travel supplies or trade." The woman who had been watching from the garden plots approached, wiping soil from her hands on worn canvas pants. "New face on the road?" she asked, her tone neutral but not unwelcoming. "Wanderers passing through," Marcus explained, "looking for water and a night's rest before continuing on." "Well, you found the right place for both," she replied, offering a weathered hand. "I'm Carla. Run the water operation, such as it is. You know anything about pump maintenance? Our secondary systems be making noises that suggest it needs attention." The Wanderer shook the offered hand. "Some. I've repaired similar systems at settlements near Diamond City." Carla's expression brightened with interest. "Diamond City? Don't get many travelers from that direction lately. Road's been trouble since that super mutant band moved into the factory complex along the eastern approach." "I took the long way around," the Wanderer explained, "through Cambridge, then the library outpost." This information seemed to register positively with both Carla and Marcus. Mention of specific landmarks and routes, suggesting legitimate travel, rather than the vaguer descriptions often offered by those with more predatory intentions. The subtle tension in their postures eased further. "Let's get you settled, then you can take a look at that pump before dinner," Marcus suggested. "Got a spare tent for travelers. Nothing fancy, but it's got a real bedroll and stays dry when it rains." He led the way to a modestly sized canvas tent positioned near the edge of the settlement area, its entrance oriented to allow easy access while remaining visible from the community's central spaces. A thoughtful arrangement that balanced privacy with security concerns. Inside was simple but clean, a military-style cot with a surprisingly intact sleeping bag, a small table fashioned from a cable spool, and a lantern hanging from the center pole. "Drop your gear, get some water in you," Marcus advised. "I'll introduce you around before dinner. Small community, but we like to know who's staying with us, even temporarily." Left alone, the Wanderer took the opportunity to organize equipment and assess supplies. The notebooks containing the agricultural information from the library were carefully rewrapped in waterproof cloth before being returned to the pack. Weapons were checked and secured, not hidden, which might suggest ill intent, but arranged for efficiency without appearing threatening. Water supplies were consolidated, empty containers separated for refilling. After satisfying immediate thirst from one of the community barrels, using the small metal cup attached to its side by a chain, the Wanderer rejoined Marcus, who introduced the settlement's core residents. Besides himself and Carla, there was Elijah, the older man who had been seated outside the main building, a former Brotherhood of Steel scribe who had left that organization after disagreements about knowledge sharing. Way, a quiet woman skilled in mechanics who maintained most of the settlement's technical systems, and the Santiago brothers, Ramon and Gabrielle, who handled security and hunting respectively. "There are usually a few other travelers passing through," Marcus explained as they completed the introductions. "Trading caravan left yesterday heading north. Probably get another within the week. We mark safe routes on that map board." He indicated a salvaged highway map mounted on the side of the main building, routes highlighted with different colored yarns, pinned to represent current safety conditions. With introductions complete, Carla led the Wanderer to the water purification system to examine the problematic pump. The setup was impressive for a wasteland operation, clearly expanded over time from the initial system Marcus had described, now capable of processing significant water volume, with redundant filtration to ensure safety. "Primary system works fine," Carla explained, pointing to the main pump assembly. "But we added this secondary unit last month after Way traded for the parts with a caravan from the western settlements. Worked great for 2 weeks, then started making a noise like something's catching inside. We've been running it only when necessary since then." The Wanderer examined the system carefully, noting the ingenious adaptations that had been made to pre-war components. "Mind if I open the housing? I should be able to tell what's causing the problem if I can see the impeller assembly." With Carla's approval, the Wanderer used tools from both personal supplies and those Carla provided to carefully disassemble the pump housing. The issue became apparent upon inspection. A small piece of metal debris had become lodged in the impeller mechanism, likely drawn in before the intake filtering had been properly calibrated. With delicate manipulation, the obstruction was removed and the housing reassembled. "Simple fix," the Wanderer explained, tightening the final connections. "Might want to add a finer mesh to the intake filter though. Small particles could still get through the current screen. We've got some window screening salvaged from the east wing of the building," Carla mused. "Could adapt that. Want to give it a test run?" The pump was activated, now running with a smooth hum rather than the concerning rattle it had produced previously. Carla nodded with satisfaction, clearly pleased to have the backup system fully operational again. "Good work," she acknowledged. "That's more than worth your water rations and a night's stay. Come on, I think dinner's about ready, and you can tell us what news you've heard on the road." The community dining arrangement turned out to be in what had once been the rest stop's main lobby, now transformed into a functional common area. Tables had been constructed from a variety of salvaged materials, surrounded by mismatched chairs and benches. A cooking station occupied what had previously been an information desk, the area behind it now filled with storage shelves containing communal food supplies and cooking implements. The meal itself was simple, but remarkably varied by Wasteland standards. Stew made with Brahmin meat and garden vegetables, cornbread baked in a carefully maintained oven, and even a small portion of surprisingly fresh mutfruit preserve for each person. The Wanderer contributed some dried meat from personal supplies, which was gratefully added to the communal offerings. As they ate, conversation flowed with the natural rhythm of a community accustomed to incorporating temporary members. Questions were asked about conditions on the roads the Wanderer had traveled, information exchanged about raider movements, mutated creature sightings, and the status of other settlements. The Wanderer shared selective information about the library outpost, enough to help legitimate travelers who might benefit from its knowledge, without providing details that could endanger Desmond's carefully maintained sanctuary. A pre-war librarian, still maintaining his collection after all this time, Elijah marveled, his former Brotherhood of Steel background giving him particular appreciation for such preservation. Remarkable dedication. The knowledge contained in such a collection could be invaluable for rebuilding efforts. That's why I was there, the Wanderer explained, careful not to mention Howard and Martha's farm specifically. Researching agricultural techniques, particularly for radiation remediation in soil and water. There's a settlement establishing expanded farming operations that could benefit from pre-war methods. This led to a thoughtful discussion about knowledge preservation and application in the Commonwealth's challenging environment. Several residents shared their own techniques for growing crops in irradiated soil, while the Wanderer offered suggestions based on the recently acquired library information. The exchange was genuinely collaborative, knowledge freely shared for mutual benefit, a rarity in a world where information often commanded high prices or was hoarded for advantage. As the meal concluded and darkness settled fully outside, lanterns were lit throughout the settlement, casting a warm glow that transformed the utilitarian space into something almost cozy. Some residents retired to their quarters, while others gathered in smaller groups for quiet conversation or games fashioned from salvaged materials. The Wanderer accepted an invitation to join Marcus and Elijah on the settlement's modest watch platform. A reinforced section of the building's roof accessed via a stairwell that had once led to administrative offices. From this elevated position, they had clear sight lines across the surrounding terrain, the highway visible in both directions, moonlight creating sufficient illumination to detect approaching movement. "We keep watch in shifts," Marcus explained as they settled into positions along the platform's edge. "Not because we've had much trouble. Our water trading policy keeps us on good terms with most groups, but wasteland habits die hard. Prudence isn't paranoia when dealing with genuine threats," Elijah added philosophically. The Brotherhood taught that much correctly, even if their application became too extreme for my taste. The night air carried a pleasant coolness after the day's heat, accompanied by the subtle sounds of the settlement below. Quiet conversations, occasional laughter, the gentle splashing of the water purification system continuing its essential work. Above, stars filled the sky in numbers rarely seen in the world before the war, their ancient light undiminished by the catastrophes that had transformed the world beneath them. "You've traveled extensively," Marcus observed after a period of comfortable silence. "Ever thought about settling somewhere? Plenty of communities would value someone with your skills and experience." The Wanderer considered the question, gaze remaining on the moonlit landscape. "Sometimes. But there's value in movement too, connecting settlements that might otherwise remain isolated. carrying information and resources between them. The Commonwealth needs both types. Howard's philosophy, Marcus noted with interest. You've met him then, the farmer. The Wanderer turned, surprise evident. You know Howard? Marcus smiled, the expression visible in the moonlight. This settlement exists partly because of him. Years back, when it was just me trying to maintain that first purifier, Howard passed through with a Brahmin caravan, helped me redesign the water system, taught me about filtering techniques he'd learned from his grandfather's journals. Those first garden plots were his suggestion too. The coincidental connection created a moment of reflection for the Wanderer, the unexpected ways lives intersected in the Commonwealth, how knowledge and assistance passed from person to person, creating networks of mutual support that helped humanity persist despite the harsh realities of the post-nuclear world. I'm carrying information back to his farm, the Wanderer acknowledged. Agricultural techniques from the library that might help expand their operations. Elijah nodded appreciatively. Knowledge reclaimed and applied. The cycle continues. That's how rebuilding happens, not in grand gestures, but in these small connections, these exchanges of information and assistance. Their conversation continued intermittently through the watch shift. Periods of attentive silence alternating with thoughtful discussion. The Wanderer shared observations about settlements in other regions of the Commonwealth, while Marcus and Elijah provided history about their own outposts' development and the challenges they had overcome. The night passed peacefully, the only movement beyond the settlement's boundaries being the occasional radstag moving cautiously across distant fields, or the flight of bloatflies pursuing their nocturnal activities far from human habitation. Eventually, Ramond and Gabriel arrived to take the next watch shift, exchanging brief updates before Marcus, Elijah, and the Wanderer descended from the platform. Rest well, Marcus suggested as they parted ways near the traveler's tent. Morning comes early here. We try to get most work done before the afternoon heat. Feel free to join whatever activities suit your skills or continue on your way. No obligations beyond what you've already contributed. Inside the simple tent, the Wanderer arranged the provided bedroll and settled in for the night. Despite its modest accommodations, the space offered luxury rarely found in wasteland travel. Security provided by a community rather than solitary vigilance. The background sounds of human settlement rather than the wasteland's ominous silence. The knowledge of clean water and potential assistance if needed. Sleep came easily, the day's travel and social interactions having created healthy fatigue. Dreams were fragmentary but peaceful. Images of Howard's farm with expanded fields, the library's shelves of preserved knowledge, this roadside oasis with its life-giving water, different points of light in the Commonwealth darkness, connected by paths worn by travelers like the Wanderer, creating networks of human persistence against the entropy of the post-nuclear world. Morning arrived with the distinctive quality of light that precedes direct sunlight, a soft illumination that gradually revealed the world in gentle increments. The settlement was already stirring, early risers moving purposefully to begin daily tasks before the sun climbed high enough to bring uncomfortable heat. The smell of something cooking wafted through the air, someone preparing a simple breakfast to be shared communally. The Wanderer joined this morning routine, contributing a portion of personal supplies to the communal meal and assisting Wei with adjustments to the solar collectors that powered the water purification system. The work was straightforward but satisfying, practical applications of knowledge that created immediate benefit, the kind of collaboration that strengthened communities across the Commonwealth. As the morning progressed, a figure appeared on the highway, approaching from the north. A lone traveler moving with the cautious efficiency of someone experienced in wasteland navigation. The settlement's watch called down notification without alarm. Solitary travelers rarely presented significant threat, and the community's policy of cautious welcome had proven effective at screening potential problems. The newcomer turned out to be a trader named Sullivan, known to the settlement from previous visits. He arrived leading a heavily laden Brahmin, its dual heads moving in different directions as though perpetually disagreeing about which potential threat deserved more attention. Packs and containers hung from a framework strapped to the creature's back, containing the assorted merchandise of a wasteland trader: salvaged tools, preserved food, medicine, ammunition, and the random useful items discovered during scavenging expeditions. "Made good time from Covenant," Sullivan announced as he reached the settlement perimeter, addressing Marcus, who had come to greet him. "Road's clear except for some rad stags near the fallen highway sign. Nothing aggressive." This information was acknowledged with appreciation. Current road conditions represented valuable intelligence in Commonwealth travel. Sullivan was welcomed into the settlement, directed to a designated area where traveling merchants could secure their Brahmin and display wares for potential trading. The wanderer observed with interest as Sullivan established his temporary shop, unfolding a weathered canvas groundcloth and arranging selected merchandise in organized sections. The trader clearly had a system, with practical items positioned prominently while more specialized or luxury goods remained partially packed, brought out only when specific interest was expressed. "I don't often see pit-boys in functioning condition," Sullivan noted, noticing the wanderer's wrist device. "Got some maintenance tools and a power coupling that might interest you, salvaged from a Vaultec facility last month." The wanderer approached, and a comfortable negotiation began. Sullivan was clearly an experienced trader, but not exploitative. His prices reflected genuine value and scarcity rather than opportunistic gouging. For communities like this roadside oasis, such traders represented essential connections to resources unavailable locally, worth cultivating through fair exchange rather than short-term advantage. After examining Sullivan's offerings, the wanderer selected some items that would be useful for the continuing journey. Water purification tablets as backup to filtration methods, specialized lubricant for mechanical equipment maintenance, and a small packet of medical supplies to replace those used during recent travels. In exchange, the wanderer offered salvaged electronic components found during the library expedition, but not needed for current purposes. With trading concluded, Sullivan joined the community for a midday meal, sharing news from other settlements along his route. His information complemented what the wanderer had provided from different regions, creating a more comprehensive understanding of current Commonwealth conditions. Such knowledge exchanges were perhaps equally valuable as the material goods traded, allowing communities to adapt to changing threats and opportunities. As afternoon approached, the wanderer began preparations for departure. The water containers had been refilled, supplies replenished through both community sharing and trading with Sullivan. Marcus provided updated information about conditions on the southern route that would eventually lead back toward Howard's farm, marking several points of interest on the wanderer's Pip-Boy map. "There's an old factory about 6 hours down the road," he noted, indicating the location. "Roof's intact enough to provide decent shelter if you need to stop before nightfall. We haven't seen evidence of occupation last few times we sent scouts that direction." The community gathered informally to bid farewell, their genuine good wishes reflecting the brief but positive interactions of the wanderer's stay. Carla presented a small package of dried fruit from their garden, an unnecessary but appreciated gesture of hospitality. Elijah offered a handwritten copy of water filtration techniques he had developed, suggesting they might complement the information obtained from the library. safe travels, Marcus said as the wanderer shouldered the now replenished pack. And if you see Howard and Martha, tell them their water filter design is still working perfectly. 6 years and counting. With final nods of farewell, the wanderer departed along the highway's southern extension, boots finding familiar rhythm on the broken asphalt. Behind, the roadside oasis continued its daily activities, a small but significant point of civilization amid the wasteland's emptiness, its water purifier humming steadily as it transformed irradiated groundwater into the clean resource that made community possible. The afternoon sun cast the wanderer's shadow ahead along the highway, a solitary figure moving with purpose through a landscape shaped by destruction, yet showing subtle signs of renewal. In the pack, notebooks containing agricultural knowledge from the library would eventually reach Howard's farm, potentially expanding their operations beyond current boundaries. The connection strengthened, the knowledge shared, the small assistances offered. These formed the underlying webwork that maintained humanity's foothold in the harsh Commonwealth reality. Hours passed in steady travel, the highway winding through terrain that gradually shifted from the relatively flat surroundings of the roadside settlement to more varied topography, low hills creating a gentle undulation in the route. Occasional stands of radiation-adapted trees providing brief moments of shade. The wanderer maintained awareness of surroundings while allowing thoughts to drift through possibilities for applying the library's knowledge to Howard's farming operations, mentally adapting theoretical techniques to practical implementation with available resources. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, casting longer shadows across the broken landscape, the factory Marcus had mentioned came into view. A large industrial complex partially reclaimed by wasteland flora, its concrete walls weathered but largely intact. The location would indeed provide reasonable shelter for the night, positioned with good sight lines across surrounding terrain and multiple potential exit routes if problems developed. The wanderer approached with appropriate caution, circling the perimeter before identifying a sheltered entry point on the building's eastern side. As Marcus had reported, the location showed no signs of recent human occupation. No fresh footprints in the accumulated dust, no evidence of fires or food preparation, no restructuring of spaces for defensive purposes. The primary hazards appeared to be structural. Portions of flooring had collapsed on upper levels, and some ceiling sections showed concerning cracks. A secure space was identified on the ground floor, a former office area with intact walls and a door that could be barricaded if necessary. Windows were positioned to allow monitoring of external approaches while providing emergency exit if required. The wanderer established a modest camp, arranging bedding and supplies with the efficient familiarity of someone accustomed to temporary shelters in uncertain environments. As darkness settled over the Commonwealth, bringing the complex symphony of night sounds that characterized the wasteland after dark, the wanderer secured the chosen space and prepared for evening rest. A small reading light attached to the pit-boy provided illumination to review notes about soil remediation techniques, ensuring key details remained fresh for eventual sharing with Howard and Martha. The factory building creaked occasionally as cooling temperatures caused materials to contract, the sounds echoing through empty production floors and abandoned storage areas. Yet there was a peculiar peacefulness to the setting. A place once filled with human activity, now returned to stillness, waiting, perhaps, for new purpose in whatever civilization might eventually emerge from the Commonwealth's gradual rebuilding. Sleep came in measured increments, the practiced rest pattern of wasteland travelers, periods of deeper sleep alternating with lighter awareness that could register potential threats without achieving full wakefulness. The night passed without incident, each hour bringing the wanderer closer to completing the journey back to Howard's farm, with the knowledge that might help expand their agricultural efforts beyond current limitations. Morning would bring continuation of the journey southward, each step carrying not just an individual traveler, but the connections between separated points of human persistence. The library with its preserved knowledge, the roadside oasis with its life-giving water, the farm with its carefully nurtured crops. Different expressions of the same fundamental quality that had allowed humanity to endure through nuclear devastation and its aftermath. The determination to build rather than merely consume, to share rather than hoard, to connect rather than isolate. As the wanderer drifted toward deeper sleep within the sheltering walls of the abandoned factory, elsewhere in the Commonwealth, another refuge of humanity glowed in the darkness. Several miles eastward stood the shell of a roadside diner, its neon sign still flickering to life each night. Unlike the water-focused community, this outpost had formed around a functioning ham radio that occasionally caught distant signals from other settlements. Inside, travelers gathered to share news and companionship, while the radio operator maintained regular transmissions, reaching out to whoever might be listening in the vast wasteland. As static gives way to occasional voices across the emptiness, our next tale awaits among the glowing dials and patient listeners. Join us for Radio Night in an abandoned diner. Twilight descended over the Commonwealth in gentle increments, the sun's final rays painting the wasteland in hues of amber and gold before surrendering to the approaching night. Shadows lengthened across the broken landscape, softening the harsh edges of destruction that defined the daylight hours. The temperature began its gradual decline from the day's heat, bringing the subtle relief that made evening travel more bearable in the unforgiving terrain. The wanderer moved with measured steps along what had once been a secondary highway, now reduced to a cracked ribbon of asphalt partially reclaimed by hardy wasteland flora. The journey from the abandoned factory had been largely uneventful. A small pack of wild dogs observed from a distance, but showing no interest in approaching. A radstorm that had required an hour's shelter beneath an overpass, but no encounters requiring ammunition or causing injury. Water supplies remained adequate after the replenishment at the highway oasis, and the notebooks containing agricultural knowledge from the library were securely stored in the weathered pack. One more night of travel would be required before reaching the region where Howard and Martha's farm lay, nestled among the gentler hills of the southern Commonwealth. As darkness settled more firmly across the land, the wanderer consulted the Pip-Boy's illuminated map display, confirming position against landmarks still visible in the fading light. According to both the electronic guide and information gathered at the water settlement, suitable shelter should be available within the next few miles. A cluster of pre-war buildings that had once served highway travelers in the world before the bombs. The Pip-Boy's radiation detector clicked occasionally as it registered the background levels that permeated everything in the Commonwealth, but showed no concerning spikes that would necessitate altering course. Its soft amber glow provided just enough illumination to negotiate the increasingly darkened path without revealing the wanderer's position to any watching eyes across the wasteland expanse. After another hour of careful progress through the deepening night, a distinctive shape appeared on the horizon, angular and clearly artificial against the organic silhouettes of distant hills. As the wanderer drew closer, details emerged from the darkness. What had first appeared as simply another ruined structure gradually revealed itself to be a roadside diner, its distinctive architecture still recognizable despite 2 centuries of abandonment and decay. Most surprising was the faint glow emanating from several of its windows. Not the harsh, unsteady light of campfires that might indicate raider occupation, but a softer, more consistent illumination. suggesting controlled electrical power. More remarkable still, as the distance closed further, was the sign mounted on a tall pole near the building's edge, its neon tubes flickering uncertainly but undeniably functioning, casting a soft red glow over the immediate surroundings and creating a beacon visible across the wasteland night. The wanderer paused at a cautious distance, studying this unexpected outpost of functioning pre-war technology. Light and power in the Commonwealth typically indicated human presence, but whether friendly or hostile remained to be determined. The sign's illumination seemed deliberately maintained rather than coincidental. Someone had invested considerable effort to restore and power such a non-essential feature, perhaps as a signal to travelers or a marker for those who knew to look for it. Moving with increased caution, the wanderer approached from an angle that provided maximum observation opportunity while maintaining distance from the most direct access routes. The diner's structure became clearer, a classic pre-war roadside establishment with the distinctive rounded corners and generous windows typical of that architectural style. The main entrance faced the former highway, while a secondary door was positioned near what had once been a parking area, now reduced to cracked concrete partially buried under wind-blown soil. The building had been pragmatically maintained rather than fully restored. Holes in the roof had been patched with salvaged materials, windows reinforced with scavenged metal rather than replaced with intact glass. External damage addressed where structurally necessary, but cosmetic issues largely ignored. It represented the typical Commonwealth approach to pre-war structures, practical utilization rather than preservation for its own sake. More telling were the subtle signs of deliberate security measures, modified entrance points that could be quickly barricaded, strategic placement of salvaged metal panels that would deflect or absorb projectiles, carefully managed sightlines that would give occupants advance warning of approach. None of the aggressive territorial markers that typically indicated raider occupation were present. No dismembered mannequins or grisly displays of previous victims. No crude gang symbols painted across visible surfaces. As the wanderer evaluated these details, a new element became noticeable. The faint but distinctive sound of voices carried on the night air, accompanied by occasional bursts of static. Not the chaotic shouting or cruel laughter characteristic of raider encampments, but the measured cadence of normal conversation, punctuated by what might be radio transmissions. Decision made to approach openly rather than with stealth, the wanderer moved toward the front entrance, posture relaxed but alert, hands visible and away from weapons. The universal wasteland signal of non-aggressive intent while maintaining readiness for trouble. The diner's illuminated windows revealed movement inside as someone noticed the approach, followed by a brief increase in conversational volume before a figure appeared in the doorway. The man who stepped onto the cracked concrete apron before the entrance carried a hunting rifle with comfortable familiarity, but held it pointed downward rather than raised. Cautious, but not immediately hostile. He appeared to be in his early 60s, with the lean physique common to wasteland survivors and the deeply weathered features of someone who had spent decades exposed to the Commonwealth elements. "Evening, traveler," he called, his voice carrying the slight rasp of age but clear and steady. "You're approaching the Commonwealth radio exchange. State your business." "Just seeking shelter for the night," the wanderer replied, remaining at a non-threatening distance. "Saw your sign from the road. Willing to trade or contribute for accommodations?" The man studied the visitor for a long moment, his assessment taking in details that would inform his judgment. The condition of equipment suggesting capability rather than desperation. The overall presentation of someone surviving through competence rather than predation. "We can usually accommodate reasonable folks," he said finally. "I'm Jackson, run this establishment such as it is. You armed? 10 mere pistol and a machete, the Wanderer answered honestly. Attempting to conceal weapons typically created more problems than it solved when dealing with established settlements. Jackson nodded, apparently satisfied with both the answer and the straightforward delivery. You can keep them, just keep them holstered while you're inside. We maintain a peaceful environment here. He gestured toward the entrance behind him. Come on in then. We were about to start the evening transmission schedule. Following Jackson into the diner revealed a space that had been thoughtfully repurposed from its original function, while maintaining echoes of its pre-war identity. The classic counter with its fixed stools remained, now serving as a communal dining area rather than short-order service station. Booths along the windows had been reinforced and modified with salvaged materials, creating more private seating areas where small groups conversed quietly. Most striking was what occupied the far end of the building, in what had possibly been a small event space or game room before the war. A remarkably intact radio setup consisting of both pre-war equipment and ingeniously adapted components. A man sat before this assembly, headphones covering one ear while he made careful adjustments to various dials and switches. Nearby, a modified generator hummed steadily, clearly the power source for both the radio equipment and the diner's lighting. "Welcome to the exchange," Jackson said, gesturing around the space with evident pride. "Started as just a shelter 16 years back when I found the place. Discovered some radio equipment in a storage room. Used to be an emergency broadcast relay station before the war. Took years to get it working again, but now we're one of the few functioning long-range communication points in the Commonwealth." The concept was genuinely impressive. While settlements like Diamond City maintained local communication capabilities, true long-distance radio contact remained rare in the fragmented post-war world. The technical knowledge and resources required to maintain such equipment represented significant investment. "So you broadcast to other settlements?" the Wanderer asked, genuinely interested in this unexpected discovery. "Broadcast, receive, and relay," Jackson confirmed. "We've identified 14 other functioning radio operations across the Eastern Territories. Some are settlements like Diamond City, others are outposts similar to ours. We maintain scheduled contact times, share information about road conditions, raider movements, trading opportunities, missing persons reports, anything that helps connect the scattered communities." As Jackson spoke, other occupants of the diner had taken notice of the new arrival. Perhaps a dozen people occupied the space, some clearly residents with the comfortable familiarity of those in their own territory, others with the more alert posture of travelers temporarily sheltering here. Their reactions to the Wanderer's arrival ranged from casual acknowledgement to more careful observation, but none showed overt hostility. "Let's get you settled," Jackson suggested, leading the way toward the counter. "Maya handles accommodations and meals. We operate on fair exchange. You can contribute caps, supplies, labor, or information depending on what you have available. Information's particularly valuable to our operation, as you might imagine." Behind the counter stood a woman perhaps in her early 50s, with dark hair streaked with grey, pulled back in a practical braid. She moved with the efficiency of someone who had developed routines over years of repetition, currently organizing what appeared to be the evening meal preparation. "New arrival, Maya," Jackson announced. "Looking for shelter tonight, possibly dinner." Maya looked up, her assessment of the Wanderer swift but thorough. "Welcome to the exchange," she said, her tone businesslike but not unwelcoming. "Dinner's cornbread and radstag stew. Sleeping arrangements are bedrolls in the back room, or there's a tent platform on the roof if you prefer privacy and don't mind the chill." Water for washing behind the building, purified drinking water here inside. That's 5 caps for food, 7 for food and lodging, or equivalent trade. The straightforward presentation was refreshing after the uncertainties of wasteland travel. Clear expectations without hidden conditions or attempts at exploitation. The wanderer reached into a pocket and produced the requested caps, sliding them across the counter toward Maya. Much appreciated, she acknowledged, sweeping the bottle caps into a container below the counter. Dinner in about 30 minutes. Feel free to claim a sleeping spot in the back room or check with Elias about the roof setup. And Jackson will probably want to pick your brain about road conditions where you've been traveling. With accommodation arranged, the wanderer moved further into the diner space, taking in details that revealed the establishment's function beyond mere shelter. Maps covered one wall, remarkably detailed representations of the Commonwealth and surrounding regions, with routes marked in different colors, likely indicating current safety conditions. Another section displayed a carefully maintained schedule of radio contacts, settlements listed with their broadcasting times and frequency. Most intriguing was a bulletin board near the radio station, covered with handwritten notes, some faded with age, others clearly recent additions. Closer inspection revealed they were messages left by travelers for others who might pass through later, creating an asynchronous communication system across a world where postal services and telecommunications had long since collapsed. "Our message board," explained a young woman who had approached while the wanderer examined this feature. "One of our most popular services. Leave a note, and if the person you're trying to reach ever passes through, they'll find it. Some messages have connected family members separated for years." She extended a hand in greeting. "I'm Jessie, by the way. I handle the morning radio shift and the message logging. You're welcome to leave something if you're looking for someone, or respond to any notes addressed to any traveler. Those are usually people seeking specific information about locations or persons." The wanderer accepted the handshake. "Mostly just passing through on my way south, but I'll take a look. It's an impressive system you've established here." "Wasn't all us," Jessie admitted with a modest shrug. "The concept started with Jackson about 15 years ago, but it's grown through collaboration. Traders who regularly moved between settlements recognized the value of a communication hub and started contributing equipment, technical knowledge, even trained radio operators occasionally. Now we're part of a loose network stretching from here to what used to be Maine, though contact with the furthest stations can be sporadic depending on atmospheric conditions." This revelation added new dimension to the diner's significance. Not merely a local way station, but a critical node in the gradually rebuilding communication infrastructure of the post-war world. Such connections represented one of the foundations necessary for any meaningful reconstruction of civilization beyond isolated settlements. The conversation was interrupted by a sudden increase in activity around the radio setup. The operator adjusted his headphones with increased attention, making careful adjustments to his equipment while reaching for a notebook positioned nearby. "Sounds like Portsmouth is broadcasting early tonight," Jessie noted, her attention shifting to the radio station. "They usually stick tightly to the schedule, so this might be important. Excuse me, I should assist with the logging." She moved quickly to join the radio operator, leaving the wanderer to continue exploring the unique environment of the exchange. The diner's residents and visitors had developed a natural rhythm around the radio operation, conversations lowering in volume when transmissions were being received, information being relayed through the space as noteworthy news was shared, individuals approaching the operators to check if messages relevant to their interests had been received. Jackson reappeared from what appeared to be a storage area, carrying additional fuel for the generator. He noticed the wanderer's interest in the radio operation and approached after completing his task. "Getting our evening transmission schedule started," he explained. Portsmouth's coming in unusually clear tonight. They're a settlement up north, built around an old naval facility. Good technical knowledge there, but they struggle with supplies. We relay information about potential trading opportunities their way when we hear of them. The Wanderer nodded, understanding. How many people operate this place permanently? 6 of us full-time, Jackson answered. Myself, Maya, Jesse, and Daniel handle the radio operation and maintenance in shifts. Cooper manages security and helps with repairs. Elias handles our small garden out back and coordinates with passing traders for supplies we can't produce. Then we usually have between 4 and 12 travelers staying at any given time. Some just for a night, others for extended periods if they have skills we need or are waiting for specific contact. As they spoke, the gentle bustle of the diner's evening routine continued around them. Maya and a young assistant distributed the promised dinner, simple but nourishing stew served in mismatched but clean bowls, accompanied by cornbread that still steamed slightly from recent baking. The room filled with the comfortable sounds of people sharing a meal, conversations flowing naturally between residents and visitors. The Wanderer accepted a portion with thanks, finding a seat at the counter where observation of both the general space and the radio operation remained possible. The stew proved remarkably flavorful. Radstag meat enhanced with cultivated herbs and root vegetables, evidence of both cooking skill and access to resources beyond the bare minimum of survival. As the meal progressed, the radio schedule seemed to intensify, with the operator making more frequent adjustments and Jesse recording information with increased concentration. Eventually, the operator removed his headphones and turned to address the room at large. "Evening news summary," he announced, his voice carrying practice projection that immediately quieted the various conversations around the diner. "Portsmouth reports increased Mirlock activity along their harbour front, advises caution for any northern coastal travel. Sunshine Tidings, Co-op, confirms successful crop rotation and has surplus potatoes available for trade. Diamond City security intercepted a raider scouting party near the western entrance. Believes major group movement unlikely, but suggests vigilance on the western routes." He continued with several more updates of varying significance. Weather patterns reported from settlements with functioning meteorological equipment, technical requests for specific repair components needed at certain outposts, notifications of caravan movements and their expected routes. The information created a composite picture of the Commonwealth's current state, reported from diverse perspectives and geographical positions. When the news summary concluded, conversations resumed with new energy, residents and travelers alike discussing the implications of various reports for their own plans and concerns. The Wanderer observed this social dynamic with interest. Information functioning as currency, creating connections and context that helped individuals navigate the dangerous Commonwealth environment more effectively. Jackson rejoined the Wanderer as the meal concluded, bringing a steaming cup that proved to contain a surprisingly decent approximation of tea, brewed from cultivated mutated flora that had developed properties similar to pre-war varieties. "So, traveler," he began conversationally, "what roads have you seen recently? Always valuable to get first-hand reports from someone who's actually walked the ground." The Wanderer provided a measured summary of recent journeys, road conditions between major landmarks, hazards encountered and avoided, the status of the water settlement and library outposts, without revealing specific details that might compromise their security. Such information sharing represented fair exchange for the hospitality received, while enhancing the collective knowledge that benefited all Commonwealth travelers. "Interesting about that library," Jackson mused when the Wanderer mentioned the general existence of the knowledge repository. "We've heard rumors about it for years, but never enough specifics to locate it. A ghoul librarian, you say? Remarkable dedication." knowledge preservation might be as important as water purification in the long run, if we're ever going to rebuild properly. The conversation expanded to include several others who had been listening nearby. A caravan guard resting between assignments, an older woman who apparently specialized in mechanical repair and traveled between settlements maintaining essential equipment, a young couple who seemed to be mapping lesser-known routes through the Commonwealth for some unspecified project. As they shared information and perspectives, the radio operation continued its systematic work, transmitting to scheduled contacts, receiving and logging reports, maintaining the fragile web of communication that connected isolated points of humanity across the wasteland. Occasionally, news of particular significance would be announced to the room at large, creating brief pauses in conversation before discussion resumed with the new information incorporated. "It's been this way for most of recorded history, you know," observed an elderly man who had joined their growing circle, introducing himself as Professor, a title rather than name that seemed accepted by the others without question. Before electricity, before telecommunications, there were always way stations where travelers exchanged information. Caravanserais along the Silk Road, coaching inns in medieval Europe, frontier trading posts in the American expansion. Human connection endures through adaptable forms. This philosophical perspective added depth to the practical operation unfolding around them, the diner functioning not merely as a contemporary solution to post-apocalyptic challenges, but as another iteration of humanity's persistent drive to maintain connection despite geographic separation. Something ancient and fundamental operating within the novel context of the Commonwealth wasteland. As evening deepened into true night, the diner's atmosphere shifted subtly. Lanterns were adjusted to more subdued illumination, conserving fuel while creating a warmer ambience. Some residents retired to sleeping areas, while others gathered in smaller groups for quieter conversations or games fashioned from salvaged materials. The radio operation continued, but with reduced personnel, transitioning to the overnight schedule that apparently required less active management. The Wanderer eventually followed Maya's earlier suggestion to examine sleeping options, finding the back room configured with several reasonably comfortable bedrolls, arranged with enough separation to provide modest privacy. After the day's travel, even this simple accommodation represented luxury compared to the improvised shelters typical of wasteland journeys. After securing a sleeping position and organizing equipment for easy access if needed during the night, the Wanderer returned to the main area, where Jackson was making final adjustments to the generator that would maintain minimal power through the overnight hours. "We reduce output after midnight," he explained, noticing the Wanderer's interest. "Keeps fuel consumption manageable while maintaining essential functions. Radio stays operational on a different circuit. That's our priority. The main lights dim, but emergency lighting remains, and we keep the sign illuminated as a beacon. The sign seems like a significant power investment for an aesthetic feature," the Wanderer observed. "Any practical purpose beyond visibility?" Jackson smiled slightly, appearing pleased at the perceptive question. "Multiple purposes, actually. The visibility is practical, helps travelers find us in poor conditions, and the distinctive pattern can't be easily imitated, so it confirms our identity from a distance. But it's also a psychological marker, something unchanged from the old world, still functioning despite everything, gives people hope, reminds them what persistent effort can maintain or restore." This explanation aligned with observations about the diner's overall operation, practical survival considerations blended with deeper understanding of human psychological and social needs. The exchange provided not merely physical shelter but connection, information, and subtle reminders that rebuilding remained possible despite the wasteland's harsh realities. As midnight approached, the diner settled into its nighttime configuration. Reduced lighting, minimal movement, quiet conversations in corners while the radio operator maintained his vigil at the communications station. The Wanderer observed this transition from a comfortable position in one of the booths, noting the practiced efficiency with which the residents adapted to the energy conservation requirements. "You should meet Edwin," suggested Jessie, who had completed her shift at the radio and noticed the Wanderer's continued interest in the operation. "He handles our overnight transmissions and has the most experience with long-distance contacts." She led the way to the radio station, where an older man now occupied the operator's position, his attention focused on careful adjustment of the equipment. Unlike the previous operator's more active engagement, Edwin's approach seemed characterized by patient listening, occasionally making minute adjustments to dials while consulting a handwritten log of frequencies and times. "Edwin specializes in what we call deep listening," Jessie explained quietly. "The atmospheric conditions after midnight sometimes allow for receiving transmissions from much greater distances, but they're often fragmented or faint. He's developed remarkable skill at extracting meaning from signals others might dismiss as random static." The older man looked up at their approach, his weathered features creasing in a brief smile of acknowledgement. He gestured for them to join him, removing his headphones and adjusting a small speaker so they could hear the audio he was monitoring. Mostly atmospheric static with occasional fragments of transmitted voice, currently too indistinct to interpret. "Catching glimpses of Pittsburgh tonight," Edwin explained, his voice soft but clear. "They're experiencing electrical storms that are disrupting their transmission, but I've confirmed their generator remains operational and no emergency conditions exist. We maintain contact protocols when direct communication becomes difficult." He indicated a map mounted near his station, marked with pins representing confirmed radio contacts at various distances from the exchange. Some were relatively close, Diamond City, Bunker Hill, settlements within the Commonwealth proper, while others represented remarkable distances for post-war communication capabilities. "Our furthest semi-regular contact is here," Edwin said, pointing to a pin positioned in what had once been western Pennsylvania. A similar operation to ours, centered around a pre-war emergency broadcast station in the mountains. We exchange contact perhaps once a month, atmospheric conditions permitting. They relay information from points further west that we can't reach directly." The implication was significant. A network of communication gradually extending across the devastated landscape, reconnecting isolated pockets of civilization that had developed independently in the centuries following nuclear devastation. Each link represented tremendous effort and ingenuity, maintaining technology that most wasteland survivors would consider incomprehensible or magical. "Any contact with the capital Wasteland?" the Wanderer asked, referring to the region that had once been Washington, D.C., now another zone of post-nuclear civilization with its own distinct development patterns. Edwin nodded, adjusting a dial slightly as he responded. "Irregular but established. They have several broadcasting capabilities there, including one operating from the ruins of their old government buildings. Atmospheric interference makes direct communication challenging, but we've established relay protocols through an outpost in the former Maryland territories." This glimpse into the broader communication network contextualized the exchange's significance beyond its local operations. Not merely a way station for physical travelers, but a critical node in the gradual reconnection of human knowledge and experience across vast distances. Part of the underlying infrastructure that might eventually enable more coordinated rebuilding efforts. As the night deepened, the Wanderer eventually retired to the secured sleeping area, where the gentle background hum of the generator and occasional muffled sounds of the radio operation created a surprisingly comforting acoustic environment. After ensuring equipment was properly arranged for quick access if needed, sleep came easily. The relative security of the exchange providing rare opportunity for deeper rest than typically possible during wasteland travel. Dreams were fragmentary but peaceful. Images of connected settlements linked by invisible radio waves carrying human voices across the devastation. Howard's farm with expanded fields, nourished by techniques recovered from the library's preserved knowledge. The roadside oasis with its life-giving water supporting travelers and residents alike. Different points of light in the Commonwealth darkness, gradually expanding their connections through the efforts of individuals who chose to build rather than merely consume. Morning arrived with the distinctive quality of light that precedes direct sunrise, a soft illumination filtering through patched windows, gradually revealing the diner's interior in gentle increments. The exchange was already stirring, early risers moving quietly to begin daily tasks without disturbing those still resting. The smell of something cooking wafted through the air, someone preparing a simple breakfast from available supplies. The Wanderer joined this morning routine, contributing a portion of personal rations to the communal meal and assisting Maya with water collection from the rainwater harvesting system established behind the building. The work was straightforward but satisfying, practical cooperation that strengthened the temporary community while providing for immediate needs. As the day brightened, the exchange's daytime rhythm established itself. The overnight radio operator transferred responsibilities to the morning shift, delivering a summary of significant transmissions and ongoing communication attempts. Residents engaged in maintenance tasks, checking generator components, repairing minor structural issues, tending the modest garden that supplemented their food supplies. Travelers prepared for departure or settled in for another day depending on their individual circumstances and objectives. Having recharged both physically and mentally during the overnight rest, the Wanderer began preparations for departure. The journey to Howard's farm would require most of the remaining day if weather and road conditions remained favorable. The agricultural information carried in carefully protected notebooks had already been delayed by the various detours and discoveries along the route, valuable experiences but not the primary mission that had prompted this particular journey. Jackson approached as these preparations neared completion, carrying a small package wrapped in preserved cloth. "For your travels," he explained, offering the bundle. "Some provisions Maya put together. Not much, but enough to supplement whatever you're carrying." The Wanderer accepted the gift with genuine appreciation, recognizing it represented not merely practical assistance, but acknowledgement of mutual respect established through their information exchange. "Thank you, both for this and for the exchange itself. What you've built here matters." Jackson nodded, his expression suggesting both pride in their accomplishment and recognition of its ongoing fragility. Radio waves and human connections. Sometimes I think they're essentially the same thing. Invisible forces that somehow bridge impossible distances. He gestured toward the door, where sunlight now streamed through in golden shafts. "Safe travels, and if your path brings you back this way, you'll find our sign lit." With final farewells to those residents and travelers who had become temporary acquaintances during the brief stay, the Wanderer departed the exchange, stepping out into the Commonwealth morning. The diner stood behind, its distinctive architecture and still visible sign creating a memorable landmark against the wasteland landscape. Inside, the radio operation continued its essential work, maintaining tenuous connections across vast distances, preserving the information flow that helped humanity persist despite the harsh realities of their fragmented world. The journey resumed with the comfortable rhythm of boots on broken asphalt, the Wanderer's shadow stretching ahead along the highway that would eventually lead to Howard's farm. In the pack, Notebooks containing agricultural knowledge from the library would soon reach their intended destination, potentially expanding the farm's operations beyond current boundaries. The connections strengthened, the knowledge shared, the small assistances offered. These formed the underlying webwork that maintained humanity's foothold in the harsh Commonwealth reality. Hours would pass in steady travel, the highway winding through terrain that gradually shifted toward the more hospitable southern regions where Howard and Martha had established their remarkable farm. The wanderer maintained awareness of surroundings while allowing thoughts to drift toward the practical applications waiting at the journey's end. Soil remediation techniques, water purification methods, crop rotation strategies that might transform irradiated wasteland into nourishing field. Each step carried forward not just an individual traveler, but the connections between separated points of human persistence. The library with its preserved knowledge, the roadside oasis with its life-giving water, the radio exchange with its invisible communication links, and the farm with its carefully nurtured crops, different expressions of the same fundamental quality that had allowed humanity to endure through nuclear devastation and its aftermath. The determination to build rather than merely consume, to share rather than hoard, to connect rather than isolate. As the wanderer continued southward under the Commonwealth sun, the radio diner gradually receded into the distance behind, its sign no longer visible, but its significance carried forward in memory and purpose. Somewhere ahead lay Howard and Martha's farm, where knowledge from the past would soon be applied to growing possibilities for the future. Another link in the gradually strengthening chain of human renewal spreading across the wasteland, one connection at a time. Thanks for wandering the wasteland with me tonight. If these stories helped you relax, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. For uninterrupted sleep, these videos play straight through without ads, letting the sounds of the wasteland guide you all night long. If you want more, check out our Patreon for early access and exclusive Spotify playlists. Link in the description. Sleep well, fellow vault dwellers. May your dreams be peaceful and your nights raid-free. Good night.